Phoenix Knights. Chapter 648. The result of this battle caught Lord Kraut and Lord Wally off guard. Although they did not expect that the two candidates on their side would win, they never thought that Rodan, who had absolute confidence, would lose. Moreover, he lost so miserably. Even if he survived, the rest of his life would be over. Solanton suddenly spoke up. Miss Elisa, this matter is very clear. Tenisha was the mastermind behind all of this. Lord Solanton and Lord Wally were merely deceived and used. Kraut and Wally weren't fools. Since Solanton had given them a way out of this embarrassing situation, the more they distanced themselves from Tenisha, the better. They hurriedly agreed, berating Tenisha for deceiving them. Solanton took the opportunity to ask Elisa to remove Tenisha from his position as captain of the Knights of Light, detaining him on the spot. Tenisha, who was being held up by the Knights of Light, struggled and shouted, "No! There's a conspiracy behind this. Miss Elisa doesn't have a specific position, she doesn't have the authority to remove me. As captain of the Knights of Light, I request to appeal to the Royal Capital Branch." Eliza blinked and suddenly thought of something. She took out an item that looked like a cross and gave off a holy aura. "Right, this was given to me by Uncle. He said that I can take it out at an important moment to represent him in making some decisions. I wonder if I can use it now." The sacred wing crest. Tenisha groaned. His last hope had been destroyed, and his entire body went limp as if his bones had been pulled out. Looking at the coat of arms representing the cardinal, Solanton and the others looked at Eliza with more awe. Eliza seemed to be unaware of it. She smiled and put away the coat of arms. She did not look at Ternius, who was being taken away, or Solanton, who was trying to please her. Her gaze fell on Chinray. Richard, is your injury okay?" Seeing Elisa's nonchalant smile, Chinray suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. There seemed to be some sort of black-bellied nature lurking behind that innocent and cute smile. Whoever treated this lady like a fool was the real idiot. Chinray looked breathless and replied, "I'm just a little exhausted. Thanks to Sir Paul just now, otherwise I would have." Paul nodded slightly at Chinray. Eliza's big eyes flashed. "Your beast-taming skills are indeed amazing. You were actually able to completely tame the Thunderbird's hatchling. Furthermore, you launched a fatal blow at the critical moment and defeated Rodan. According to our agreement, you have now officially become a Radiant Knight candidate, and I am your recommendation. As long as you pass the 3 years probation period, you can become a real Radiant Knight." "Thank you, miss." Chinray saluted as a Knight of Light. "Go and have a good rest first. I want to go to the Magical Beast Trade Fair in the afternoon. I just happen to lack a guide." Chinray wanted to say that it was also his first time in Garden City, but he saw the look Solanton was giving him and immediately nodded. Understood. Chinray was not qualified to participate in the following banquet. Instead, he hurriedly went to Garden City with the monks arranged by Solanton to familiarize himself with the environment. He did his homework in advance to prepare for the upcoming guide job. In the afternoon, Chinray took Eliza and Joanna to stroll around Garden City. He seemed to be a veteran who was familiar with the roads. In addition to the Knights of Light who were guarding, Paul also followed. Along the way, Joanna talked to Eliza and ignored Paul, who was constantly trying to please her. Paul was infuriated, but he acted as if nothing had happened. The Magical Beast Market in Garden City was very lively. There were many species of demonic beasts, and many of them were untamed. Their prices varied. Chinray had an eye-opening experience. He saw all kinds of demonic beasts in the human world. The one that impressed him the most was the griffin. It was fierce and powerful. It had the body and claws of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. It could fly in the air. Humans had already mastered the secret technique of taming griffins, turning them into the strongest aerial mounts. There were not many griffins in the Magical Beast Market. Most of them were ordinary. There was one whose strength reached sea level, which was equivalent to a demon king. According to Chinray's estimation, the strength of a griffin was not inferior to the wyvern of the demon realm. Although it did not have the poisonous attribute, its agility and ferocity were superior. In contrast, the thunderbird was even rarer. If the griffin was more like a shadow of a beast, then the thunderbird was a real bird. It had the talent of thunder and lightning. Its fierceness was even more than the griffin, only below the dragon, the overlord of the sky. The thunderbird was stubborn and difficult to tame. Many people were surprised when they saw the thunderbird chick on Chunrei's shoulder. Some even came up to ask for the price. The thunderbird generally lived in a special environment. So Lanton once said that this thunderbird chick came from the Island of Storms in the southern sea of the Yanshao Kingdom. The Island of Storms was one of the famous dangerous places in the human world. Just the violent hurricanes that surrounded the island all year round made people stop at the sight of them. The Island of Storms contained countless dangers and many powerful beings. Compared to one of the ultimate creatures, the thunderbird could only be regarded as a minion. This creature was called the Titan. The Titan was a giant creature, also known as the Titan Giant. It was extremely powerful and could directly use its physical strength to compete with the powerful dragon. In addition to powerful close combat strength, the Titan Giant also had powerful long-range magic attacks. They were born with the ability to control thunder and lightning. There were also a small number of talented ones who could control frost and storm. The Titan Giant's will was extremely strong. It would not be affected by any negative mind magic, such as flash, paralysis, fear, etc. Legend had it that there were countless treasures and wealth on the Island of Storms. There were also legends that there was another mysterious and powerful creature on the Island of Storms. There were many different opinions. Over the years, countless explorers had gone to the Island of Storms, but very few of them had survived, including some saint-level experts. None of them had returned alive. Legends were just legends. In reality, there were indeed some special resources near the Island of Storms. This thunderbird hatchling had been accidentally caught by a mercenary team who had ventured to the edge of the Island of Storms to pick a rare thunder grass. It had been sold at a high price in Garten City and had been bought by Solanton. "Richard, your thunderbird doesn't seem to have a binding seal?" Eliza asked in surprise. Chunrei immediately corrected her. "This isn't my thunderbird, Miss Eliza. It's a gift from Master Solanton. It's yours now." Eliza flashed a cute smile. "My beast mastery is actually very amateur, but as a hobbyist I can feel that even with this thunderbird by my side, its true master is still you. That's why I'm giving it to you. Actually, I'm more interested in you than the thunderbird." "Huh!" Her words were easily misunderstood, but Eliza quickly continued. "I heard from Pastor Manna that you're a child of a large family. You came out to train for the right of inheritance, but you seem to have the soul language and beast mastery of the elves. I'm very curious. Who are you?" Chunrei was secretly vigilant, but on the surface, he showed a bitter smile. "Everyone has their own secrets. I can be honest with Miss that the soul language was obtained by chance. This is actually the biggest foundation of my beast taming skill. If it wasn't for the power of soul communication with my strength, it would be impossible to control Thunderbird with just the beast taming skill, even if it was just a young bird. So that's how it is." Eliza nodded and said, "However, your beast taming skills are very special, especially in some of the details. In short, Reverend Solanton has a good eye. You are a candidate with great potential to become a Knight of Light. If you're willing, I can recommend you to the Knights of Radiance branch in the capital of Yanshao to learn from Lord Ryuman. If you perform well, you'll become an official Knight of Radiance in less than 3 years. With your potential and specialties, you'll definitely become a core Knight of Yanshao, and maybe even have the chance to enter White Cliff in the future." "In the future?" "Unfortunately, I want to enter now." Chunrei could vaguely hear Eliza's intention to recruit talents for the faction, and he felt that this girl could not be underestimated. He revealed a contemplative look, but finally shook his head. "Thank you for your kindness, miss, but my ambition is not to become a lifelong clergyman. I just want to become a follower of a paladin, and then take back what belongs to me with my own hands." "Oh, I see." Eliza revealed a look of regret, but she immediately regained her cheerfulness. It's all right, but you've disappointed me. Knight Richard, as a punishment. Tell me the story of how to obtain the soul whisper. Just as Chinrui was about to speak, Joanna pulled Eliza aside. Eliza, we've seen enough here, let's go to the busiest street. Didn't you want to buy that? Eliza was stunned for a moment, looking at Joanna's expression as realization dawned on her. So it's that thing. All right, Richard, take us to the busiest commercial district. Lord Paul, Uncle Wesley, you can go back and rest. Paul frowned, looking at Joanna. What do you want to buy? Let me go with you, there are too many people in Garden City, how can there be no one to protect you? We're going to buy a woman's personal belongings, do you really want to go with us? Joanna said coldly. Eliza also looked at Paul with a weird look. Paul suddenly couldn't stand it, so he had to remind Chinrui to pay attention to safety. Then, he turned around and left with the guard knight, Wesley and others. After Paul and the others left, Eliza and Joanna both smiled knowingly. This was the first time Joanna had smiled, and that gentle smile was exceptionally moving. No wonder Samuel was willing to go to the demon realm for her. Chinrui thought about what Samuel had said before, and a thought came to his mind. Ladies, the largest commercial district in Garden City is in the east of the city, we should go this way. Richard, I'm warning you now, do not tell anyone about what you see or hear next. Eliza's expression suddenly turned fierce. Otherwise, not only will I strip you of your status as a substitute knight, I'll also lock you up in the church's inquisition. Understood? Chinrui nodded hurriedly, adding, I swear by the God of Light. Chapter 649. The three of them walked to a more secluded street, and a cloaked man appeared in their line of sight. When Joanna saw the cloaked man, her face was overflowing with joy. She no longer had the indifference she had when she faced Paul, and she walked briskly towards him. Even though the cloaked man was well hidden, Chinrui could still recognize him at a glance. It was Samuel. Samuel caught a glimpse of Chinrui from the corner of his eye, and he seemed slightly surprised, but Joanna quickly took his hand and left. To prevent Eliza from getting suspicious, Chinrui deliberately asked hesitantly, That person, remember your vow just now? Eliza glared at Chinrui fiercely, scaring him back into his words. Miss Eliza, what do we do now? Let's wait here first, Joanna probably won't. Eliza thought for a moment, and suddenly blushed, showing a curious look. Say, what do you think they will do when they are together? Chinrui secretly rolled his eyes. It seemed that Eliza was also in the know. However, the stubborn Samuel had already made up his mind to defeat Paul fair and square, so the chances of him eloping with Joanna was very small. However, the young couple was in a passionate relationship, and now that they had reunited after a long time, it was not surprising that they would get a room on a whim, and study Sutra of Mistress Sue and the like. However, he definitely could not say this to Eliza. I think Miss Joanna must be discussing some meaningful issues with that friend, such as life ideals and so on. Chinrui added in his heart, while also discussing the structure of the human body. Richard, you really are an interesting guy. Eliza burst out laughing. Why don't you tell me about your adventure with the soul word? Chinrui knew he could not avoid this, so he could only tell her. He had many stories in his head, so he could just randomly pick one. However, out of caution, the plot of this story was still quite complete. The climax was when he saved an elven girl in a critical moment. After several twists and turns, the elven girl used a special inheritance method to pass the power of the soul whisper to the male protagonist when her life was in danger. Due to the difference in power and race, the male pig feet could only unleash a small portion of the mind word's power, which was incomparable to a real elf. However, the male pig feet took a different approach and used the mind word to research and develop his own special beast taming technique. Inheritance? So that's how it is. Eliza's eyes widened as she added, That elven girl. Is she beautiful? Chinrui nodded and quickly added, Of course, compared to Miss Eliza's beauty, there is still a gap. Is that so? Are you saying I'm more beautiful than an elf? Eliza held her face excitedly, and continued to ask about female elves. Chenrei could not resist any more when he saw Joanna's figure appearing in front of him. She was walking toward him alone, and Samuel was not by her side. Wait for me at the street corner. Eliza threw a sentence at Chenrei and walked toward Joanna. Eliza walked forward and held her good friend's arm. She pulled her to the side and asked in a low voice, "How is it?" Joanna's eyes seemed to be a little red, but she was in good spirits. She replied softly, "I'm fine. I'll return to the Long Huang Empire after you finish your business here." Eliza was startled. "Why? Don't you want to? He said he wants to marry me openly. He has already sent a letter to Rex the Great through the family. He will fight it out with Paul when he returns." Joanna shook her head with a determined look in her eyes. "I believe him. No matter what happens, I will face it together with him." Eliza was stunned for a moment, but she soon revealed a bright smile. "Don't worry, he will definitely succeed." Joanna held her friend's hand and nodded. At dusk, Chenrei led the two girls back to the Radiant Church. Solanton and Fatty received the news and came to welcome them at the gates. "Lord Solanton, Garden City's scenery is quite enchanting. I had a pleasant afternoon. If possible, I hope to have Richard as my guide for the next few days. Of course, it would be an honor for both of us." Solanton had been worried that Chenrei would not be able to serve this young lady well, but hearing Eliza's words immediately made him overjoyed. Lord Manna, you were the one who discovered Richard, weren't you? You have great foresight." Eliza smiled sweetly, adding, "Also, thank you for the small gift. TT this. It's also my honor." Manna was so excited that he was almost incoherent. He lowered his head and bowed deeply, a smile blossoming on his chubby face. Richard had truly been the right choice to work with him. "All right." Eliza stretched lazily. "Lord Solanton, I only came to Garden City to relax. There's no need for any social engagements. I've been walking around all afternoon, I'm very tired. I'm going to rest for a while." Eliza and Joanna went to their rooms to rest, while Chenrei ate something casually and went to the prayer hall. He had been busy the entire day and hadn't had the chance to greet the God of Light yet. Be it in quantity or quality, Garden City's power of faith far surpassed that of Gudan Town. Chenrei would not be able to drain it all in 1 or 2 tries, and there were many people in the church. Just in case, he would choose to commit crimes when there was no one around or in the dead of night. However, at this rate, the power of faith in the Statue of Light in Garden City would be almost depleted after 2 or 3 more times. It would take at least a few months for it to recover to its original state. The Shura had absorbed a considerable amount of faith. This incarnation was mysterious and unfathomable, like a bottomless pit. It would not be filled because of this, but it would take a lot of time to convert so much faith power into faith crystals. There were many more life planets in the super system compared to when he had evolved to 5 stars. As the scale of the Pillar of Faith expanded, the power of faith grew rapidly, and was converted into faith crystals through the Tower of Faith. There were more than 6,000 left after the 6-star evolution, then he got 8,000 from Gudan Town. Coupled with the system growth and digesting part of the number in Garden City, Chenrei's faith crystals had accumulated to 30,000. It was estimated that after the conversion of the power of faith in Garden City was completed, the total number should exceed 100,000. Compared with the past, this speed was already quite fast, but Chenrei felt that it was still not enough. If he went to a big place like Yanshao Kingdom or the Long Huang Empire, the speed should be doubled again. Then, it would not be a problem to gather 1 million faith crystals and rush back before the Light Annihilation Seal on Isabella exploded. The key now was the Snow Dowlet. Chenrei was already a Knight of Light candidate, but only after entering this circle did he know that the Knight of Light was actually the low-level thugs of the church. Now, due to the selection of the Temple Knights, White Cliff was closed. With the identity of a low-level thug like Chenrei, he was still not qualified to enter. At least, he had to be an intermediate thug like the Knight of Light leader. With his qualifications, it was impossible for him to directly become a Knight of Light leader. The only way was to use the identity of a Knight of Light candidate to become a follower of a Temple Knight and enter with the Lord. It would take a lot of time to find a Temple Knight to serve at the last minute. Fortunately, someone had already sent himself to the door. Although he was not a Temple Knight, he was qualified to participate in the selection of the Temple Knights this time. That was tall, rich, and handsome Paul. Shinrui was resting in the prayer hall, using the power of Shura to steal faith, while thinking. When the resting was almost done, he already had a rough plan in his mind. When he walked out of the prayer hall, it was already late at night. Shinrui looked up at the night sky with a bright moon and sparse stars, and walked straight to the back. The VIP building behind the garden square was Paul's residence. However, when he just walked into the garden square, his ears suddenly twitched. His body swayed and disappeared into the night. The reason why Shinrui activated stealth was because he heard a voice. Although the source of the voice was far away and seemed weak, it couldn't hide from his hearing. What interested him in particular was that the voices of both sides of the conversation were familiar. In a corner of the garden square, two figures were standing in front of a tree. With the help of the moonlight, one could clearly see that one of them was a petite female figure. It was Eliza, and the other was a tall figure. It was not her good friend Joanna, it was Paul. Shinrui frowned. These two people, meeting at this time, what? Eliza flicked her curly hair in the wind and said, "What? You don't believe what I just said? Or you don't want to face the reality?" Paul became silent and did not say anything. "The fiancé made an appointment with the mysterious man and will return in a few hours. Don't you want to know what they are doing?" Eliza let out a light laugh. She was confident that she had a strong mind and knew everything around her, so she was not afraid of someone eavesdropping. A murderous look flashed in Paul's eyes and he clenched his fists tightly. "If I say that Joanna came to Garden City with me this time to see this man, and even wanted to leave everything behind to leave with this man, would you believe me?" With a crack, the sturdy stone slab under Paul's feet suddenly cracked. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "Aren't you her best friend? Why are you telling me this? I just feel unworthy for you, or perhaps I don't want to see a future Temple Knight be humiliated." Eliza pursed her lips and smiled. "Actually, you have already guessed who that man is, haven't you? Then do you know that a duel is waiting for you? I believe that His Majesty Rex, who likes to play with the balance, will be happy to see this show. Just because of that loser?" Paul sneered disdainfully. "If I can defeat him once, I can defeat him a second and a third time. Even if he has reached the saint level, he is still no match for me. Even if you marry Joanna, her heart will still not be with you." Eliza shook her head. "Perhaps you can use the duel to kill that love rival, but Joanna will hate you for the rest of her life. If you don't kill him, she will not give up on that man. So, no matter if you win or lose, you will still be a loser." Paul snorted coldly. He clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. What Eliza said was the truth. You want to marry Joanna, other than her beauty, it is more for your family's ambition. Eliza took a few steps forward and stood in front of Paul. "Tell me, who is more beautiful, me or Joanna?" Paul glanced at Eliza and frowned. He gave an answer. "You." After saying this, Paul turned around and strode away. He quickly left the square garden. What a hypocritical guy! Looking at his back disappearing into the night, Eliza's lips curled into a smile that was completely opposite to her pure appearance. "But he is a good toy, isn't he?" Chapter 650. Looking at the playful smile on Eliza's seemingly childish face, Shinrui's eyes narrowed slightly. It seemed that he had underestimated this girl. It turned out that the familiar feeling of déjà vu was not Alien or Alice, but Celine. Now, he could be considered to have touched the edge of the Church of Light. This institution that controlled almost all human beliefs was above the royal power. It was huge and extremely complicated, and the internal factional struggles were particularly fierce. Thinking back, How could the niece of a cardinal and the disciple of a saintess be an inexperienced, naive girl? Not everyone was like a certain little princess who had an elder sister who protected her in everything. Not every elder sister was like Her Majesty the Empress, who was willing to turn herself into an umbrella and completely shelter her younger sister from the outside wind and rain, although this practice was still debatable. Chinray suddenly came to a realization. During the day, Eliza pointed out a series of his origins, and curiously, asked about the story of the mind language. It turned out that her real intention was to find out his background. It was not difficult to kill Eliza or Paul, but this was the human world, a mysterious and unpredictable world full of unknowns. Back then, the Lord of Midnight Sun had once suffered a bitter defeat, especially now that saving Isabella was his top priority. Before collecting all the faith crystals and obtaining the snow dowlet, he must not act rashly. Eliza was an important figure in the Church of Light, and the God-eating mask, a control technique of dark power, would definitely not work. However, for Chinray, Eliza was just a passerby, and the one he really needed to interact with was Paul. Paul walked all the way back to his room, feeling really depressed. In fact, Eliza was right. He pursued Joanna more because of the Philip family behind her, but he also had some long-standing feelings for Joanna. It was not easy to use Joanna's father to provoke Samuel into a duel and defeat his rival in love. Who knew that Joanna was still infatuated with Samuel, and did not show any mercy to him, the winner? This time, she actually went to Garden City to elope with Samuel. Eliza was right. No matter the outcome of the second duel, he was still the loser. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Paul opened the door to find Richard, the newly promoted knight-in-waiting. "Richard? It's so late, what's the matter?" Richard revealed a hesitant expression, as if gathering his courage. "Lord Paul, I have something important to report. Can I come in?" Paul nodded and walked into the house. Chinray looked around and cautiously closed the door. Then, he walked over and bowed. "Lord Paul, this matter made me very hesitant. I thought about it for a long time and decided to report it to you." "Speak." Chinray clenched his teeth and said, "After parting ways with you at the Magical Beast Market this afternoon, I brought Miss Eliza and Miss Joanna to the business district, but Miss Eliza ordered me to take another path. On that path, Miss Joanna met with a mysterious man. The two of them seemed to have talked for a long time. From Miss Eliza's warning to me, this man seemed to have an unusual relationship with Miss Joanna. Eliza's order?" Paul's face turned gloomy. "What does that man look like?" He was wearing a cloak, so I couldn't see his face clearly. I only felt that his gaze was very sharp. As for his figure, he was a little shorter than you, Lord, and seemed a little thin. Humph! A haze flashed past Paul's eyes. If Richard had told him before he talked to Eliza, Paul would definitely have flown into a rage. Now that he heard this news for the second time, he was much calmer. From the information provided by Richard, that man was undoubtedly Samuel. "Richard, didn't you say that Miss Eliza had warned you? Why did you run over to tell me this news?" Chinray took a deep breath. "Do you still remember what happened during the day, Lord? Miss Eliza wanted to recommend me to the Knights of Light branch in the Yanshao Kingdom to learn from Lord Ryuman, but I refused. My answer was that I don't want to be a clergyman for life. I want to become a follower of a paladin, and take back what belongs to me with my own hands." Paul's eyes stared straight at Chinray, and he said indifferently, "I'm not a paladin. Although you aren't now, you will be very soon. I believe in your potential, Lord, and I believe in my own foresight." Chinray raised his head, and met Paul's gaze. For this, I didn't hesitate to bet everything, and took the risk of offending Miss Eliza or being silenced to come here. Now I boldly ask you, Lord, did I choose the wrong person? Paul saw the strong confidence in Chinray's eyes. This kind of confidence made him feel more comfortable than any flattery, and the gloominess in his heart was washed away quite a bit. He nodded slowly. "You didn't choose the wrong person, Richard. You bet on the right person this time. You have foresight, you have courage, and you dare to risk your life in the arena. However, becoming my follower is not an easy thing, especially when your background is unknown. To tell you the truth, Lord, I come from a large family in a kingdom. I once swore that before I take back what belongs to me, I will only be an ordinary wanderer. The only thing I can tell, Lord, is that my family not only has influence, they also have considerable financial resources. When I left my family, I made some preparations just in case. As Chunrui spoke, he took out a bag and offered it with both hands. There is a bag of aqua sapphires here, and the total value is about 50,000 black crystal coins. This is my gift to you, Lord. If I can control my family in the future, then as your follower, I will receive your protection and support. I will provide you with all the resources that I can, Lord. This is a win-win situation. Paul took the bag and opened it. There were more than 10 pure aqua sapphires inside, and they were definitely worth more than 50,000 black crystal coins. This was indeed a considerable amount of wealth. This Richard's background was not ordinary indeed. Paul put the sapphires away without any trace of politeness. Very well, Richard. This may not be your real name, but I will call you that for the time being. I will respect your oath, and will not ask about your true background for now. When I become a paladin and help you take back everything, I hope that our win-win situation can continue forever. This sentence had already explained Paul's attitude. Richard had the ability, courage, and was good at seizing opportunities. He also had the financial resources, and it was reasonable for them to have a mutually beneficial relationship. Only a fool would chase such a follower out the door. Chunrui revealed a look of joy and bowed deeply. He told Paul about the contract he had signed with Mana, and requested that he sign a master-slave contract with Paul after the contract was over. This confession finally dispelled the last of Paul's doubts. After Chunrui swore a solemn oath of loyalty to the God of Light, Paul gave him a few words of encouragement. Little did he know that this information was actually second-hand information that was deliberately leaked. As for the supreme God of Light that Chunrui had sworn on, he had been nibbled by Lord Paul's follower as a tonic just an hour ago. Lord, about Miss Joanna, don't make the fact that you have become my follower public for now. Joanna, continue to keep an eye on her. Don't do anything else, and report to me immediately if anything happens. Paul thought for a moment. Also, be careful of Eliza. She is far more difficult to deal with than you look. Miss Eliza? Chunrui pretended to be very surprised, and then nodded. Understood, Lord. I will not disturb Lord Paul's rest. I will take my leave now. The next morning, Joanna proposed to leave Garden City and return to the Long Huang Empire. She was very determined, and from the expressions of Joanna and Paul, the two seemed to have had a big fight. Eliza's persuasion was useless, and Joanna insisted on not letting Paul escort her. So, she had to let 2 knights of light escort Joanna south to the town of Vegas, and through the waterway to the Crimson Dragon City of the Long Huang Empire. Crimson Dragon City was a port city, and the city lord, Stephen Philip, was Joanna's uncle. Chunrui did not know if leaving early was the plan that Joanna and Samuel had agreed on, but no matter what, it was a good thing that Joanna could leave Eliza, a scheming friend. For a moment, Paul became the most awkward person. He was no longer in the mood to follow Chunrui and Eliza on the streets, and so he locked himself in his room to sulk. Eliza had been a little sad about her good friend's departure, but she soon immersed herself in the joy of shopping, and sometimes she would suddenly ask Chunrui some strange questions. Chunrui already knew the true colors of this girl, and most of those questions were indirect probing. It was obvious that Eliza had some interest, or suspicion, in him, a knight in waiting. The day passed in the blink of an eye. Eliza bought a lot of things, and most of them were paid for by Chunrui. She would naturally be reimbursed when she returned. The Church of Light had countless believers, and it was only natural that their wealth would be endless. There was a saying in Chunrui's hometown: 3 years to clear the magistrate's mansion, 100,000 snowflakes of silver. Even in a small place like Yudan Town, Fatty Mana could become a rich man, not to mention Solanton, who had been operating in Garden City for many years. Moreover, this was an inspection by the higher-ups. In fact, it was just a tour, so all the expenses would be paid from public funds, and there was no need to pay for it personally. In the evening, Eliza, Solanton, Manna, and the others went to the Fragrance Manor in the south of the city. Tonight, it was the fat city lord Kraut who had invited Eliza and the people from the church, and it was also to apologize for the previous candidate incident. Chinray was also invited, and only Paul, who was in a bad mood, did not go. The fat city lord brought Lord Wally and the others, and personally welcomed Eliza and the others at the gate all the way into the manor. The Fragrance Manor was one of the most famous places in Garden City, and it took up a lot of space. One of the partners behind it was actually the fat city lord, and business was quite prosperous. Private rooms often needed to be reserved, and of course, the people who wanted to curry favor with the city lord accounted for a lot of it. Just as the group of people walked into a corridor, a group of drunken guests walked out of the room in front of them, and there were a few waiters supporting them. Chinray suddenly frowned, not because there were two people with B-rank strength among these guests, but because of the murderous aura. Suddenly, something strange happened. The lights in the vicinity were all extinguished. For a moment, shouts, cries of alarm, the sound of something tearing through the air and whistling resounded in unison. Chapter 651. In an instant, the entire area was shrouded in a black fog so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Terrified shouts and screams were mixed with the soft sounds of moving at high speed, and from time to time, there were short and crisp sounds of metal clashing and buildings shattering. The flickering light could not tear through the oppressive darkness, and was quickly engulfed. In the endless darkness, a ball of light burned above. Within the flame was a slender hand, and the gentle light illuminated the girl's delicate face. Her large eyes had turned silver, and her body exuded a terrifying aura. Under the flames, a few phantom-like figures wrapped in rising black mist could be seen approaching. Eliza's tender voice rang out. "Light explosion!" That ball of gentle light suddenly became incomparably dazzling and suddenly exploded. The ghost-like figures were struck by lightning and fell down one after another. The body of the black fog became much thinner, and some of the fog even burned with white flames, accompanied by mournful screams. This attack was bright, and the thick black fog was like snowflakes meeting fire. Under the force field of the light explosion, the black shadows had nowhere to hide and fled in all directions. The black fog completely disappeared, and the lights in the surroundings gradually returned. However, many people were in a mess. They could see that everything had collapsed, and the ground was covered in blood and cracks. After a long time, the situation was finally brought under control. "Damn the curtain of darkness! Miss! Are you all right?" Wesley, who was in charge of protecting Eliza, had a large sword in his hand. The sword was dripping with blood. Eliza slowly landed and shook her head. "I'm fine. Uncle Wesley, how are you guys? Roy's injuries are very serious. The wound seems to be poisoned, and he needs to be treated with cleansing immediately. The other two are slightly injured, but they're fine." Before Wesley could finish his sentence, Solanton's horrified voice rang out. "Oh my God! Manna!" Manna's short and fat figure fell to the ground, a dagger in his back. Black blood flowed all over the ground. A faint milky white light appeared in Solanton's hand and enveloped Manna, but Manna still did not move. Wesley bent down to take a look and shook his head. "Don't waste your magic power. This stab has completely shattered his internal organs and completely annihilated his life force. Even if the dagger is not poisonous, it is impossible to save him." In light magic, there was an ultimate, resurrection spell, that could restore a destroyed life and body. It was even more effective than the resurrection potion, but there was a certain probability. Not only that, but the requirements for this spell were extremely high. Those who were not gifted could not learn it, and the spellcaster would have to pay a huge price. It was said that apart from the Pope, only the Saintess of Light had this power. Even though Eliza was the Holy Maiden's disciple, she didn't have the ability to use the resurrection technique, and she certainly wouldn't use it on a minor character like Mana. Wesley's words made Solanton despair. Mana was his cousin and a henchman on the same side. The fatty was quick-witted. He had accepted the assignment of a big shot from above and did not hesitate to hide in a small place like Gu downtown for many years, making a lot of achievements. Now was the time for him to rise. After successfully getting on Eliza's side, it was only a matter of time before he became the Bishop of Yanxiao. Who would have thought that he would die in such an accident? Not only did the big shot's plan fail, but as the person in charge of the church, Solanton also had an undeniable responsibility for Mana's death in Garden City. At such a sensitive time, if the enemy seized the opportunity to make a fuss, he would very likely become a sacrificial pawn. Priest Mana was stabbed to death? Eliza, who was treating Roy's poison, frowned. Did the assassins survive? Wesley looked at the bodies of the assassins that were automatically melting on the ground and shook his head. This is a very secretive professional organization. Judging from the assassination just now, Mana's death shouldn't be a coincidence. No matter what. Eliza slowly stood up, her gaze falling on the fat mayor who rushed over to check on Mana's body. Mayor Kraut, you should give me and the church an explanation. Even though he was not injured, Kraut's body was now soaked in cold sweat. Most of it was because of the shock from the assassination, and most of it was because of the terror he was feeling now. This time, he had invited Eliza, Solanton, and the others to attend the banquet. His goal was to resolve the impact of the incident with the Knight of Light candidate. Even though Solanton was only the person in charge of a city-level church, and was part of the city lord's rule, Solanton had the Church of Light behind him. The Church of Light was the spokesperson of the God of Light, the indisputable guide of the human world. Its divine authority was even greater than the monarchs of any empire or kingdom. Kraut and Solanton's relationship had never been very harmonious, but the real reason he had joined forces with Lord Wally was because of Ternicius's promise. If someone else took control of the church in Garten, there would be a huge leap in terms of cooperation and benefits. What surprised Kraut was that Ternicius had actually missed out on the little beast Master Richard. It could be said that Solanton had miraculously reversed the situation. Kraut was filled with regret at this moment. The invitation this time was to send a positive signal to repair relations with Solanton, and also to please the disciple of the Saintess, the niece of the Grand Cardinal Elisa. However, such a terrifying assassination had happened in his own territory, and even a local person in charge of the church had died. If this matter was blown out of proportion, he might not be able to keep his position. Miss Elisa, I really didn't know this would happen. Kraut stuttered incoherently, his usual eloquence completely gone. The Dagger Brotherhood! Solanton suddenly thought of something and shouted. Mana was assassinated twice by the Dagger Brotherhood on his way to Garten. This should be the third time. I've heard of this organization, Elisa pondered. But if it was just to deal with Priest Mana, they wouldn't have chosen such a timing. Mana is probably just a bystander. I'm their main target. Hearing this, Kraut seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly agreed. That's right. No matter what, this damned assassin organization is definitely involved. I'll investigate this matter with all my might and report it to the royal capital. I'll uproot the Dagger Brotherhood in the country. Whether it was the Dagger Brotherhood or not, they had to find someone to take the blame for this matter. They had to calm Eliza down before anything else. As for who was the mastermind behind this and what their motives were, they would leave the church to deal with this kind of high-tech and deep water problem. Thinking of this, Kraut immediately ordered for the manor to be locked down and the search area to cover the entire Garden City. In fact, with the size of Garden City, the assassin's strength and methods were impressive. It would be difficult to find anything with just the guards alone, so this action was more of a show of stance. With Mana dead, they would definitely not be able to eat this meal. They had to calm the people from the church first. While Kraut offered a large sum of money to comfort the people from the church, he arranged for people to clean up the scene. However, an unexpected turn of events happened again. Elisa was absent-mindedly listening to Kraut's compliments when she suddenly felt a strong sense of danger, like a frog being targeted by a venomous snake. This feeling came without any warning and came from her well-trained battle instincts. At this moment, Chunrei's voice rang out. "Miss Elisa, be careful behind you!" Behind Elisa was a guard who was cleaning up the corpses. He was slightly short, but it was this inconspicuous guard who suddenly exploded with a terrifying murderous aura the moment Chunrei shouted. No one would have thought that after the assassination, there would be a second assassination. Or, it could be said that the previous attacks were just a feint. This attack was the true sure kill. The target of the murderous aura was Elisa. In that instant, everyone felt as if the entire sky had turned into a sea of blood, filled with killing intent and the smell of death. Everyone was affected by the terrifying pressure. Breathing was difficult, and their bodies were almost unable to move. Compared to this, the suppression of the dark canopy of the heavens was like child's play, and this was only the aftermath of the murderous aura. A ray of light with a terrifying will of death swept towards Elisa's heart at an indescribable speed. Elisa felt the threat of death, and all the hairs on her body stood up. Her eyes shone with a silver light, and a powerful spiritual energy exploded. At the juncture of life and death, Elisa no longer held back any of her strength. With her at the center, everyone was sent flying by the strong repulsive force, except for that will of death. The ray of light only paused for a moment, and then heavily hit Elisa's back without slowing down. However, Elisa had already used this precious pause to lean forward to reduce the force of the attack. Not only did she weaken the force of the attack, she also moved away from her vitals. Even so, Elisa was still unable to completely avoid the attack. She spat out a mouthful of blood, and a hole was formed in the ground. After Eliza was hit, she suddenly twisted her body and turned her palm into a blade. Her arm was like a whip as it lashed out. The bodyguard behind her couldn't stop in time, and his left shoulder was hit by the palm blade. He immediately let out a muffled groan and was sent flying. A large fan-shaped crack appeared on the ground, extending close to 10 meters in an instant. A few tall pillars in the vicinity were shattered and collapsed by the invisible force, and the bodies of the guards who couldn't dodge in time exploded. It was clear how powerful the attack was. After the assassin missed, he seemed to know that it would be difficult for him to do anything else. He decisively chose to retreat, borrowing the force of Elisa's attack to escape into the darkness in a few blinks of an eye. Elisa clutched her right chest, revealing a pained expression. She spat out another mouthful of blood, and her body swayed. "Wesley, quick, send me back to the church. Get Paul to treat my injuries." The Knights of Light quickly escorted Elisa back to the church. Solantan and Chunrei led a group of cultivators and followed closely behind, leaving the city lord standing there in a daze, breaking out in cold sweat. He was at a loss for what to do. On the other side, a short and skinny figure dressed in a guard's uniform flew quickly in the night, holding his left shoulder. Suddenly, the figure stopped and looked behind him vigilantly, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Just as the assassin turned around, he was shocked to see that there was another person in front of him. The person's facial features were very hazy, but the person's eyes shone brightly, seeming to emit a faint aura of destruction. Chapter 652. The assassin reacted quickly. In the next second of shock, the stream of light in his hand had already swept towards the figure like lightning. This attack did not have the astonishing momentum of the sneak attack on Eliza, but it was more concise and effective, and its power was not much inferior. The mysterious figure did not move. Just as it was about to be pierced by this attack, the stream of light suddenly stopped, as if a poisonous snake had been suddenly grabbed by its weak point. It turned out to be an awl, with a snow-white blade and a strange pattern vaguely visible on the handle. The tip of the awl was easily grasped by a hand, and no matter how hard the assassin tried, he could not advance or retreat. The assassin's full-force attack was easily blocked by the other party. His heart trembled, and he decisively abandoned his weapon. At the same time, a ball of flame burst out, and then under the cover of the flame, he quickly retreated like a light smoke, and in a few leaps, he had already escaped. In fact, this light smoke figure that escaped was just an illusion. The real assassin had already quietly sneaked in another direction, and in the process of sneaking, he quickly changed into a cloak. The cloaked person swaggered through a few streets and came to an alley. Finally, the feeling of danger was gone. Just as he was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he felt that there was something in his hand. It was an awl, and the tip of the awl was casually grasped by a hand. No matter how hard he tried, he could not advance or retreat. Was it just an illusion? The assassin felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that the strength of this mysterious enemy was unfathomable. He did not care about hiding anything, and the tip of his tongue quickly spat out an inaudible incantation, and the sharp awl suddenly shot out a dazzling light. Light of extinction! With the sharp awl as the center, the light that shot out spread out like a small sun, bursting with destructive light and heat. To the assassin's horror, everything within the range of the sun light did not burn and evaporate at a high speed as expected. The surrounding space was filled with an incomparably strange power, and the light of extinction seemed to fall into a quagmire, and was quickly devoured. The assassin felt that his power was pouring uncontrollably through the awl in his hand towards the other party, and his body kept trembling. Finally, the other party stopped the devouring power and let go of his hand. The assassin held the awl and staggered a few steps back, but did not escape. The difference in strength between him and this mysterious enemy was too great, and it was unrealistic to escape or counterattack. It was better to save his strength, and if necessary, at least there was a possibility that he could end his life. "Who are you?" the assassin finally spoke. Surprisingly, it was a woman's voice. It was a little hoarse, and it was hard to tell if it was the original voice. "I should be the one asking that." The man seemed to be smiling. Although he could not see his face clearly, he could feel the meaning behind that smile. "Light of extinction is a top-level light spell, right? It seems that when you attacked that girl just now, you seem to have deliberately hidden your most commonly used attack method and the characteristics of your strength?" After a moment of silence, the female assassin asked, "You're not one of her people? Her? That girl?" "I don't know her," the man said with interest. "I'm just a guest, and I'm a little interested in what happened. Especially the serial killing you set up, it's ingenious. First, he used the failure of the group of assassins to attract everyone's attention. Then, when everyone let their guard down, he suddenly killed them. If it were me, I would also find it hard to guard against it." The female assassin clutched her injured shoulder and shook her head. "If I was facing a true Saint-Tyr powerhouse, I wouldn't have been able to achieve my goal, even if it was a sneak attack. Moreover, that so-called killing trap was set up by herself. I just played a small role in it on the spur of the moment." Although the female assassin's face was covered by a layer of strange power, the man's faintly red eyes seemed to be able to penetrate that layer of concealment, directly looking at her face and even her heart. The female assassin felt like she was completely naked. She was secretly shocked. This mysterious man must be a true Saint-Tyr powerhouse, or even had reached the peak of the Saint-Tyr. In the human world, this kind of powerhouse was already the pinnacle of existence that everyone had to look up to. Unless it was the legendary peak of those who were closest to the gods, such as... "So it's a trap within a trap." The man seemed to understand and nodded. "If I say you can use the whole thing in exchange for a chance to leave, what will you choose?" The female assassin replied resolutely. "I'd rather die." "I can see your determination from your eyes then." The man held his chin and thought for a moment. "All right, you can go." The female assassin was a little shocked, and then showed a look of suspicion. He was letting her go so easily. Could it be that the man was really just a passerby who was just asking out of curiosity? "That's right, there's still a price to pay." The man's figure instantly appeared in front of her. The female assassin was about to attack when she felt that her body was completely out of control. Then, a thick male aura pressed against her, and before she could react, her mouth was already sealed by the man's lips. Her body trembled, and it was as if she had fallen into a dream. When she woke up, the man and the strange illusion had disappeared without a trace, as if what she had just experienced was really just a dream. The female assassin subconsciously touched her wet lips, clenched her teeth, and covered her shoulder with her hand, before disappearing into the night. At the same time, on the other side of the radiant temple, Chen-Rui touched his lips, revealing an expression that did not know whether to laugh or cry. Under his bestowal, the avatar had a relatively independent consciousness, and could act as another person. This consciousness had the ability to not betray the avatar, but it also had some of Shura's original characteristics, such as the behavior just now. The feeling of intimate contact was transmitted to the main body through some kind of mysterious connection, and it made Chen-Rui quite speechless. In the Radiant Temple, Paul had already rushed over upon hearing the news, and brought Eliza into the room for emergency treatment. Outside, Wesley and the other Knights of Light were tightly guarding, and even Solanton was not allowed to approach. The assassination this time was very bizarre. The moment he was surrounded by the curtain of darkness, Chen-Rui clearly felt that Eliza's mental strength was spying on him. Chen-Rui did not know where he had exposed himself. At that moment, the one that Eliza paid the most attention to was not the assassin, but him. It could also be that the assassin's strength was not enough for Eliza to be cautious. When Chen-Rui discovered that one of the assassin's targets was the fat priest Mana, several thoughts flashed through his mind in that instant, but in the end, he did not make a move. Mana's goal was the bishop position of King Yangshao's capital. In the past 2 days, because Chen-Rui successfully got Eliza's appreciation, Mana's mind was more active. While he was secretly delighted, he was also afraid that this partner would be out of control. He asked Chen-Rui to go to the church of King Yangshao's capital to be the Knight of Light. He even faintly revealed the intention of using the contract as a threat. Chen-Rui did not have time to accompany the fat man to be involved in the church's power game. As for the threat, it was even a joke. Now that Eliza was spying on him, he simply stood by and watched. He did not expect the second assassination in advance, but the assassin's strength of the peak stage of the Demon Emperor could not hide from his senses. After discovering that the assassin's target was Eliza, Chen-Rui decisively gave a reminder this time. Eliza's identity was special. Once she died here, everyone present could not get away with it. It would definitely affect his plan to sneak into the White Cliff, so he made a prompt decision. As a result, Eliza and the assassin were both injured, but they finally saved their lives. The information that Shura gave back made Chen-Rui a little confused. Judging from the mental fluctuations of the female assassin, she should not be lying. This time, it was not a serial killing, but a trap within a trap. In other words, the first assassination was controlled by Eliza herself. The female assassin just cleverly mixed into Eliza's layout and took the opportunity to launch a fatal blow. So, the real murderer who killed Mana is Eliza? Mana didn't even have the time to curry favor with Eliza, let alone offend her. Moreover, if Eliza really wanted to kill Mana, she could do it with just a flick of her finger. What was her purpose in using the name of the Dagger Brotherhood to kill him? Also, who was the mastermind behind the attack of the Dagger Brotherhood on the way to Garton City? With all kinds of doubts, Chen-Rui looked at the VIP building that was guarded by a few Knights of Light in the distance. With a thought, his body suddenly became transparent, merging with the darkness and disappearing. In Paul's room, light burst out. 2 figures were sitting cross-legged, one in front of the other. Paul's left hand emitted a ball of dense golden light, fusing into Eliza's naked back. There was a terrifying wound on her back. This process was slow and careful. Paul's forehead was already dripping with sweat, and Eliza's skin started to twist strangely, as if there was a snake wriggling inside. Eliza clenched her teeth and tried her best to endure the pain. Her body was covered in cold sweat, and the speed of her wriggling became faster and faster. She moved to a cut on her right wrist and suddenly spat out a yellow liquid. When the liquid fell on the ground, the specially made hard wooden boards were instantly corroded. The yellow liquid gradually turned red, and finally turned into blood. Only then did Paul let out a sigh of relief. He retracted the golden light, and a ball of soft white light appeared on his right hand. The wound on Eliza's back gradually healed, and eventually, not even a scar could be seen. In terms of healing, light magic really had a magical effect that water magic could not compare to. However, healing magic was not omnipotent, and there was a time limit. Using it continuously would not only greatly reduce the effect, but it would also destroy the body's self-healing ability and cause internal injuries, unless one had a special physique like the body of light blessing. This time, Eliza's injury was not light. Although Paul had helped to remove the hindrance in her body, that kind of light magic could only heal her external wounds, and the internal injuries would need a long time to heal. "All right, thank you." Eliza's tense body softened. "Help me put on my clothes. I'm exhausted." Paul stood up and helped her put on a robe, then stepped back. "Is he that scary?" Eliza's voice was a little weak. "Help me wipe my sweat. I really don't know how you're a man. You don't like women at all." Paul took out a towel and helped her wipe the sweat on her face. His gaze fell on the pair of considerable peaks on the girl's chest, and he slightly moved his eyes away. Eliza was a little dissatisfied with his disregard. She was about to speak, but Paul already spoke. "What's going on with the assassin this time? Such a terrifying scarlet scorpion power, could it be the Prowler Union's saint-level assassin?" "Humph." Speaking of this, Eliza's eyes emitted a frightening cold light. "It's not the Prowler Union. Although she deliberately used an attack method and power attribute that she's not good at, in an attempt to deceive people, she couldn't hide it from me." Paul's expression changed slightly. He seemed to have thought of something, but in the end, he did not speak. Chapter 653. "Don't you want to ask something?" Eliza looked at Paul. "Or do you want to be alone for fear of getting involved in the battle of the Holy Lady faction?" Paul did not answer, but he just frowned. Eliza smiled with a worldliness that was not commensurate with her age. "From the moment you became a candidate for the Divinity Temple Knight, it was already impossible to be alone. Not everyone can be like your teacher, Paladin Captain Pari. In other words, you don't have this strength at all now. What is even more wrong than standing in the wrong team is not standing in the wrong team. Although the opportunist will sometimes be fought for by all parties at the same time, it is impossible to get true trust. He will always be the object of rejection and contempt." Paul was silent. Eliza took a deep breath and stood up. "There is a saying that opportunities are highly contingent, but only those who are prepared can grasp it. Okay, I'm going back to rest. Thank you for your help." Eliza walked a few steps. When she reached the door, she turned around again. "There is another saying, opportunity knocks but not once. Even if you are prepared, opportunities will not always appear. Once you lose them, they may never come back. Seriously consider what I said to you last time. I won't say it a second time." Paul was deep in thought. He didn't even notice Eliza walking out of the room. Chinrui, who was peeping on the side, quietly left the room. When he heard the battle of the Holy Lady faction, he already had a general outline in his heart. The female assassin should also be under the Holy Lady faction, and it was likely to involve disputes such as heirs. The purpose of Eliza's previous assassination should not only be to kill Mana, but it was more to affect the chain reaction of the forces behind Solantan and Mana. The Church of Light was too deep, and he was not interested in exploring it. As long as it did not affect following Paul into the Holy Light Mountain, it was fine. Although the human world was the homeland that Arthur yearned to return to, for Chinrui, the demon world was his true home. He missed his beloved woman very much, missed his friends, and missed the world of purple moonlight. That night, Chinrui had a dream. In the dream, he was an emperor. Athena, Rala, Isabella, all of his lovers were his concubines, including the two empresses. For an otaku, what could give him a greater sense of achievement than realizing his dream in the Crystal Palace? From then on, Student Emperor lived a carefree and happy life every day. He hugged women on his left and right, and slept with them all. He was very happy. As for the imperial court, it was too taxing on his mind and body. It was better to save some energy for sex. The more concubines in the harem, the better. However, when it came to fighting for favor, it was a headache. They would often fight with each other, causing the male pig-trotters to be shot while lying down. Blood sacrifices to the Crystal Palace. At the same time, the behavior of henceforth, the emperor did not attend court early, caused his subjects to complain. Chaos broke out everywhere. In the end, the rebel army fought to the entrance of the capital. He could only take his concubines and flee. In the end, because of the dispute over whether to go by water or by land, the harem once again habitually fought. Sparks flew everywhere. When it was settled, they were already surrounded by the rebel army. At this moment, the male pig-trotters, student emperor, finally cried. When he woke up the next day, Chunrei was still reminiscing about the dream. Of course, he was reminiscing about the most beautiful first half of the story. As for the ending, it was selectively ignored. As the saying went, there was no need to care too much about the details. People could not live without pursuits in this world. This great dream must be realized, and it will definitely be realized. Sisters, empresses, wait for me. Brother will definitely come back. It seemed to be some kind of connection in the unseen world, or perhaps it was the resentment, of an otaku. The power of resentment. At the same time, in another world. It should be called the A-class space. In a grand ceremony, two high-profile leaders suddenly shuddered at the same time when they met for the first time. Both of them were women. One was an icy beauty, while the other was a mysterious beauty with a veil covering her face. They were the two most powerful women in the entire demon realm. They were also the rulers of the two great empires, the two Empress Majesties. The Shadow Empire's Queen Catherine the Great came to the Fallen Angel Empire for a week-long state visit. This would be a meeting that would attract the attention of the entire demon realm. Although there was no lack of female rulers in the history of the demon realm, it was very rare for two empresses to appear at the same time, especially in the context of only 3 empires. However, when the two empresses met for the first time, they shuddered at the same time, which surprised the surrounding officials. "The wind is a bit strong, Your Majesty Jia." Catherine was the first to recover. There was a charming smile behind the veil. "This time I came to the beautiful Fallen Angel Empire with peace and hope. Since it was the first time I met Your Majesty, I was inevitably a little nervous. Now I'm much more relaxed because at least we have one thing in common. If a certain dreamer was here, he would definitely snicker smugly. You two sisters still have one most important thing in common." Jia also showed a kind smile. "Your Majesty Catherine, this is indeed an unexpected common ground. This is a good sign. I am very much looking forward to promoting more common interests between the two empires in the next 7 days of meeting." Catherine nodded, and the two empresses walked into the palace side by side. In the past few months, after a series of diplomatic incidents between the Fallen Angel Empire and the Shadow Empire, the relationship between the two countries finally warmed up and launched cooperation in many fields. Although the time was not long, many of them were just starting, and some of the results were not obvious. In the long run, there was considerable potential and benefits. The most surprising thing was the Green Shade estate of the Fallen Angel Empire. This was originally a small estate north of the Red Spirit estate. The soil was barren, and the terrain was dangerous. It faced the Fallen Angel Empire to the west. In addition to the Red Spirit estate, it was also bordered by several small and medium-sized estates. It was originally a buffer zone with very little room for development. After Royce, who was appointed by Jia, took office, he spared no expense to build roads and expand towns. He was once regarded as a laughingstock by the lords. However, the Green Shade estate was soon designated as a special economic zone by Empress Jia, and various pilot projects were launched. Under Royce's active operation, various projects were successfully implemented and carried out with extraordinary results. The previously built roads and expanded towns played a huge role. The disadvantage of being unable to develop due to the restrictions of the various estates became the advantage of communication links. Although many things were only in their embryonic form, they could see extremely attractive prospects. If it continued to develop like this poor and originally inconspicuous small estate would become one of the most important economic hubs of the fallen angel empire. This made people admire Her Majesty Jia's means of turning something rotten into something magical. This was also something that the former regent Obsidian couldn't achieve. This was the first official and most important foreign visit since Jia ascended the throne. Compared to the Bloody Empire, which was still in civil strife, Catherine's friendly visit had a very small positive significance. It was likely to affect the future of the entire demon realm. The two empresses sat side by side on the two thrones on the steps of the hall. As the host, Jia sat on the left, and the guest, Catherine, sat on the right. Jia said, "Your Majesty Catherine, please allow me to introduce you. This is the Prime Minister of the left, Oliver Lucifer, and the Prime Minister of the right, Stiller Bohr." Every time a name was mentioned, the corresponding person would bow and salute. Kathleen nodded to them one by one. When she introduced a masked cloaked person, Kathleen took the initiative to say, "I think this is Her Majesty Xia's fiancé, Lord Aguile." A trace of warmth flashed through Jia's eyes when she heard this name. With a touch of longing, she said, "Yes, he is Aguile. Due to a certain life oath, he can't take off the mask on his face. Please forgive him, Your Majesty Catherine." "It's fine. I've always been a little curious. How did this mysterious man capture Her Majesty Jia's heart?" As Catherine spoke, her limpid black eyes glowed with a burning light. Her gaze pierced through the veil and locked onto the cloaked figure. After the cloaked man bowed slightly, he raised his head. The purple eyes behind the mask met Catherine's eyes. In an instant, everyone nearby felt a strange throbbing, as if two incomparably powerful forces had silently collided. Soon, calmness was restored, as if nothing had happened. Many people thought it was an illusion. Catherine's eyes behind the veil narrowed, intertwined with a dignified, surprised, astonished, and puzzled look. She lowered her head to the cloaked man, showing a special respect. This was the respect for the strong. The cloaked man also lowered his head to return the salute, then retreated into the crowd of ministers. Many ministers looked at Aguile with a change in their eyes. This mysterious man, who was only a deputy commander of the Imperial Guard, had a powerful strength that made the demon realm's first sage, and also the second strongest, Catherine, respect. As expected of the strong man who once killed He Yao. He is much stronger than the rumors. Congratulations, Your Majesty Jia. You have found a true guardian. Catherine's eyes had returned to clarity. Your Majesty Jia has many admirable aspects. Among them, I admire Your Majesty's eyesight the most. For example, that human Chunrui, who was a powerless human captive at the beginning, is now the most famous minister in the demon realm. I think the development of the Green Shade Estate's special zone this time should be inseparable from his planning. When Catherine said this, she had been observing Jia's expression. Jia replied calmly, "Your Majesty Catherine is overpraising. As Your Majesty guessed, the special zone does have Chunrui's planning. Originally, I wanted to appoint him as the finance minister. Unfortunately, he doesn't care about power, and he is unwilling to leave the Dark Moon Estate. To be precise, he is unwilling to leave his lover, who is the acting lord of the Dark Moon and the Empire's new third general, General Athena. Wales. He usually stays in the dark and only does some planning behind the scenes. He even resigned from the position of the finance officer of the estate. There is actually such a human man." Catherine smiled. "Your Majesty Jia means that if I have the conditions to borrow this talent this time, I must poach the Dark Moon Lord and the third general, Athena? General Athena's father is the Empire's first general, George, who is loyal to Your Majesty. In this way, it seems that I have no hope." Jia smiled slightly. "Your Majesty is joking. Our cooperation is not based on sacrificing the interests of either party, but a win-win situation of mutual benefit. By the way, the popularity of Magic TV is quite high now. Can the two countries' Battle Ball League that we have been planning officially start?" Of course, I believe this will become a grand event that the people of both countries are looking forward to. Advertising, broadcasting, and peripheral goods will also bring huge economic benefits. Catherine did not ask about Chenrui anymore and talked about it enthusiastically. However, the faint doubt in the corner of her eyes still did not dissipate. Chapter 654. The eye-catching first meeting of the two empresses was quite successful. Both sides ended the first day of talks in a friendly atmosphere. In the fallen angel's secret palace, Jia looked at Aguile, who had taken off his cloak and mask, and nodded. Rala, thank you. It turned out that the Aguile, in front of Catherine previously, was Rala in disguise. Anyway, Aguile was usually disguised as the cloaked man. No one had seen his true face, so as long as Jia approved, it was not difficult to disguise. Oh, Miss Long responded. Jia moved her gaze to Isabella on the side. How are you? I won't die for the time being. Isabella yawned and showed a casual smile. It's just that there's nothing to be responsible for now, so I've become lazy. I feel a little sleepy all day, and I'm also a little afraid of the cold. This is good. I can sleep for a long time one day, and then I can let go of everything. After Jia learned about Isabella's curse, she asked her to temporarily put down the secret intelligence department and recuperate in peace. This time, Isabella learned that Catherine was visiting, so she took the initiative to come up with this idea to let Rala replace Chenrui as Aguile. Rala had very few friends. Athena was the best one, followed by her second comrade in bed and the fashion designer, the little seductress. During the period of recuperation in the Rainbow Valley, Isabella fully demonstrated her diplomatic ability and established a fairly harmonious relationship with Rala. When Rala was protecting Jia, she also had a good relationship with the Jia sisters. Especially the little Loli, in order to become the magic secret of the big-breasted alien, she deliberately flattered her. She called Miss Long sister and teacher, which made Miss Long really unable to reject her. Therefore, Miss Long specially put down her training and experiments to help this time. Rala, are you sure you can defeat Catherine the Great? Isabella asked Rala to pretend to be Aguile. Firstly, she wanted to intimidate Catherine. Secondly, she wanted to explore the background of the second powerhouse of the demon realm. Thirdly, she wanted to publicize the identity of Chenrui. In the future, whether it was bestowing or doing things, including the marriage with Jia, it would be much smoother. Recently, there had been many voices of doubt in the imperial capital, and they were all about the Empress's fiancé. If Jia was just the original Lord of the Dark Moon, then she wouldn't be troubled like this. Many people thought that Jia was the ruler of a kingdom. As her husband, although he didn't have any real power, he represented the highest status symbol of the entire empire. People like Aguile with unknown origins couldn't become the husband of the princess. Therefore, Her Majesty Jia should choose a spouse from the royal family. That way, the bloodline of her descendants could be guaranteed to be unique, because it was difficult for high-level masters to give birth to children. Rala didn't pretend to be in a daze this time. She thought for a while. I don't know. Isabella and Jia looked at each other with surprise in their eyes. Rala was recognized as a super powerhouse. She had already stood at the peak of the demon overlord level. She once showed her power on the battlefield of the decisive battle with Obsidian. The two dragons of the peak stage of the demon overlord were ravaged by the fairy Miss Long like a piece of cake. The right Prime Minister, Stiller, Boar, and the Empire's top magician were all her registered disciples. Now that she had obtained the source power of Earth given by the Earth Elemental King, she was one step closer to nationalization. Unexpectedly, with this level of strength, she actually didn't have the confidence to win against Catherine. Catherine not only has wisdom and beauty, but also powerful strength. The second powerhouse of the demon realm really lives up to her reputation. Then, what about the top powerhouse, Raisin the Great? To what extent is he? That Catherine is very strong. She is almost the same as me. A light flashed behind Rala's glasses. Not only that, one of the bloodline talents of the Asmodeus royal family is the weakening of elements. It is very difficult for the magician to deal with this kind of talent. If the opponent is Catherine, then she will be more difficult to deal with than the Black Dragon's immune physique. The specific outcome is still uncertain now. We will only know after the actual battle. I am confident that at least I will not lose. Well, Her Majesty should be preparing for the party tonight. I'm going back to sleep for a while. I'm so sleepy. Isabella nodded, yawned, and didn't salute. She put on her veil and walked straight out. Jiao's eyes showed worry. Despite the suppression of the power of fertile Yuan soil, Isabella's recent state seemed to be a little bad. It was probably a precursor to the complete outbreak of light annihilation seal. Don't worry, he will definitely come back in time. Jiao's voice made Isabella, who was walking to the gate, stop her footsteps. Although the two were love rivals, who competed with each other on the issue of men, there was actually a strange feeling and trust between Her Majesty Empress and Ms. Intelligence. This feeling of confidence started from the Obsidian Dark Moon Crusade. Yes, that guy never lets us down. This time it was the fake naive fairy Miss Long who usually cherished her words. The word, we, contained many meanings. Isabella responded casually and continued to walk out. Her body suddenly felt warm, and she felt that the wind outside was not so cold. On the other side of the space, Qinrui didn't know that the special economic zone he planned had developed to this extent in a short period of time, nor did he know that his two Her Majesty Empresses had officially met for the first time. In fact, when she was at the Dark Moon Estate, Her Majesty Empress, who was alias Ice, had pretended to be a guard who came to meet Jia. Later, she even captured Qinrui's father-in-law, Asgeler. At this moment, he was invited by Eliza to go to the ladies' room. There were no Knights of Light guards such as Wesley outside Eliza's room. Qinrui knocked on the unlocked door, and a sweet voice came from inside. Please come in. Qinrui walked in and saw Eliza wearing a white dress. She leaned lazily on the sofa in the living room, showing a different kind of charm, but Qinrui didn't have any thoughts. He saluted from a distance. Miss Eliza, good morning. Good morning, Richard. Eliza sat up straight. Close the door. Qinrui closed the door as instructed. Eliza gestured for him to sit down on the opposite sofa. Richard, I called you here to thank you for your reminder yesterday. The situation was really critical at the time. If you didn't speak in time, I would have probably died in the hands of that assassin. You don't have to be so polite, Miss Eliza. This is what I should do. Besides, your strength. I'm ashamed to say this, but I didn't know you were so powerful. All I could do was warn you. Even if I didn't say anything, you should have had the ability to avert the danger. Eliza smiled noncommittally, her eyes squinting. What I'm curious about is, even I didn't notice that there was something wrong with that guard. How did you notice? Qinrui was already prepared for this question. He answered, It's like this, Mississippi. You should know that I can communicate with magical beasts with my soul speech. At that time, the Thunderbird on my shoulder sensed the guard's killing intent and felt a strong sense of fear. This phenomenon didn't happen when the assassins appeared earlier. When I sensed this abnormal phenomenon, I didn't have time to think too much and shouted desperately. Many magical beasts had innate senses that humans didn't have, and this was a high-level creature like the Thunderbird. This explanation was reasonable. Eliza nodded and didn't pursue the matter. Instead, she changed the topic. No matter what, I should thank you properly. Before that, I want to confess something. Actually, I've always been suspicious of you. Suspicious? Qinrui looked surprised. This wasn't completely fake. He had long felt Eliza's suspicions, but he didn't expect her to say it herself. I've had a strong spiritual talent since I was young, and I can keenly sense other people's emotional fluctuations and even psychological changes. For example, that Lord Wally coveted my body, that Fat City Lord's extreme desire for power, and a certain future Temple Knight actually had some thoughts about me, but due to various considerations, he had been suppressing it. These can't hide from my feelings. Speaking up to this point, Eliza stared into Chinray's eyes and slowly said, "Only you, according to what you said about your background, should have many desires and pursuits. But you gave me a feeling of nothing or indifference. This is very abnormal. Therefore, I've always been suspicious of you, and even suspected that you were a spy sent by one of my enemies. It wasn't until you reminded me at the critical moment, and saved my life, that my doubts were dispelled." Chinray became vigilant. So this was the reason. Back then, Samuel had used the eyes of truth to see through his disguise. Now that Eliza had shown this kind of sensing ability, there were also many people with extraordinary talents and wisdom in the human world. They couldn't be underestimated, and he had to be more cautious in his actions in the future. However, this reminder out of consideration for the plan just happened to dispel Eliza's doubts. It could be considered a lucky hit. What Miss sensed may be related to the elves' mind language, and Chinray smiled bitterly. "Miss said that I've experienced many things and many failures, including feelings, so some emotions. Oh? Is it related to that elf?" Chinray went with the flow and nodded. "From the moment she died in my arms, I felt like everything in me was destroyed. It was only a long time later that I pulled myself together, but I don't know why, but I seem to have lost all feeling towards other women. Perhaps she gave me some sort of mental hint before she died." Chinray had wanted to say that he had become gay, but in the end he felt that it would be too much, so he could only change to a more subtle way of saying it. This time, it was Eliza's turn to be surprised. She looked at him with a strange expression, especially the look in her eyes. It made Chinray have the urge to roll his eyes. "Fine, weird it is, but it's better than being suspicious. I'll bear with it. Since we've already made things so clear, I won't be unreasonable, Richard." Eliza did not dwell on the issue of being gay, and said with a straight face, "I hope you can become my right-hand man. I will definitely put you in an important position, not just to thank you, but also to acknowledge your talent. You can stay in Garden City, or you can go to the capital. I can guarantee that in less than 3 years, you will become a paladin of light, and you might even have a chance to enter Whitecliff. If you don't plan to become a clergyman for life, as a paladin of light, with my help, even if you're a prince of some kingdom, I can still fulfill your biggest wish." To Richard, this condition was already very tempting. Chinray's eyes brightened, showing that he was tempted, but he fell into hesitation. After a long time, he finally gritted his teeth and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Eliza. Your condition is indeed very tempting, but it's a pity that I've already sworn to be a follower of Lord Paul. I originally signed a contract with Pastor Manna, but now that he's dead, the contract has been dissolved. I will keep this contract until I personally see Lord Paul become an official paladin of the temple. This is my promise to Lord Paul." Eliza frowned. "My uncle is a cardinal, and my teacher is the saintess of the Radiant Church. Is becoming my follower not as good as Lord Paul?" Miss Eliza's background is far beyond Lord Paul's. Chinray shook his head, this time much more resolute than before. "But even if Miss Eliza can trust a follower who would betray the Lord for his own benefits, I would not have the face to stay by your side. Richard, your dedication and character have surprised me, but at the same time I admire you." Eliza revealed a complicated expression. "Should I congratulate you for having such a follower? Or should I be jealous of you, my Lord Paul?" As soon as she finished speaking, Paul slowly walked out of the room, looking at Chinray with undisguised admiration. From this moment on, Chinray knew that he had gained Paul's complete trust. At the same time, Eliza's vigilance had been dispelled. Eliza probably had the intention of recruiting Chinray. That kind of persuasion that moved Chinray's emotions and benefits was not only to rope him in, but also to show Paul. She should have already known that Chinray had become Paul's follower. If Chinray was truly moved by those benefits, Paul would definitely lose trust in this follower, and she would have a legitimate reason to poach him. Unfortunately, she failed. In fact, what Paul and Eliza didn't know was that even though Paul had restrained his aura, Chinray had long since known that he was hiding in the room. The reason why he had said that was because of Paul's intentions, and also because he had cleverly delayed the matter of the contract until they entered White Cliff. "You can go back and rest now, my most loyal assistant." Paul put away his arrogance and smiled at Chinray for the first time. "I still have some matters to discuss with Miss Eliza." "Oh right, be prepared to leave at any time. Follow me back to the Long Huang Empire to settle some matters, then I will take you to White Cliff to participate in the selection of the paladins of the temple. I can guarantee that you will see with your own eyes the moment I receive the sword of a paladin. It will be an important moment that you will never forget for the rest of your life." Chinray responded with a smile, bowed, and left the room. "However," he added in his mind, "you will never forget what happens when the time comes, adorable paladin." Chapter 655. After Chinray left the room, Elisa spoke up. "He's a good follower, but didn't you say that a little too early? Do you really think you can become a paladin?" Seeing the confidence in Paul's smile, Elisa shook her head lightly. "You're a saint, and your teacher is a paladin. Logically speaking, you should have some hope. But there's an old saying, life is unpredictable." "What do you mean?" Paul's brows furrowed. "White Cliff is a place where rules are everywhere." Elisa stood up. "While absolute power can override everything, you're not strong enough to override certain rules. Even your teacher, Pari, has rules that he can't overcome. With your intelligence, I don't think I need to say more." Paul's expression darkened. "Are you threatening me?" "Don't misunderstand, I'm just telling you the truth." Elisa stared at Paul without fear. "If you want to choose Lord Passari's path, it obviously won't work. You need to think about your own position, or you'll be eliminated by the rules sooner or later." After saying that, Eliza revealed a smile. "About the matter I mentioned last time, have you considered it? You might look conceited on the surface, but I know you're a smart person. You might not say it, but you've definitely thought it through. Don't doubt my judgment, I'm not lying to Richard about my innate ability. I know you're hesitating, but there's no third person here, so I'll just make it clear. The Lomans are only a mid-tier family. You've become Lord Passari's disciple for two reasons. Firstly, you want to learn from him, and secondly, you want to use the influence of the sacred mountain to expand your family's strength. That's probably the biggest reason you're pursuing Joanna. She's the eldest daughter of the family, and she doesn't have a younger brother. As long as you have the right methods, the entire Philip family will become your puppet in the future. With the help of the sacred mountain, it's not impossible for the Lomans to become the #1 family in the Long Huang Empire." Paul raised his eyebrows, only to hear Eliza's tone change. "But have you ever thought that even if your dream is realized, you will still be a pawn in the hands of the Emperor? And your involvement with the sacred mountain will also arouse suspicion. Who knows, one day, everything you've painstakingly built up will be destroyed by a single thought from the Emperor. You should stop being half-hearted and make the right choice." Paul finally opened his mouth to explain. "For me, choosing the Long Huang Empire and the Church made no difference. At least there was only one king in the Long Huang Empire, and there were too many powerful figures in the game with the Church. I was just a pawn, so I couldn't bet everything on the Church. You still don't understand? In the eyes of the Church, you have the secret hand of the king behind your back, but in the eyes of Rex the Great, you are a member of the Church. When the time comes, you will not be able to please either side. It's fine if you're just an inconspicuous pawn, but you're a man with great ambitions. This dangerous situation will become more and more obvious as you and the Roman family become stronger. You should have received the news that Rex the Great will personally host the second duel between you and Samuel. I believe this is already enough to explain something." Paul's forehead was covered in sweat. He had always been conceited and calculative, but as he was closely involved in the situation, Eliza's words were like a blow to his head. There were indeed some things that he had not carefully considered before. It's not too late to wake up now. Eliza saw through Paul's thoughts. Of course, you can give up on the Church and bet on choosing the side of the Long Huang Empire. But I have to remind you that with Rex the Great's scheming mind, this may very well backfire on you. And even if he chooses to trust you, Will you still have any value in the eyes of others after you've lost the most important background of the sacred mountain? I boldly predict that even the Philip family's first reaction will be to break off the engagement. Paul took a deep breath. Are you trying to say that now that the Temple Knight selection is imminent, I must make a decision before then? It seems that you have already made up your mind. Eliza smiled. Although there are many branches in the White Cliff Church, the three main branches are the dominant ones. His Holiness the Pope, who represents the Archangel, is the head of the three branches, followed by the two patriarchs, His Holiness Pusmer and my teacher, Her Holiness Eudora. There are many talented people in the Pope's branch. My uncle, Cardinal Roger, and the Chief Inquisitor, Seuss, are the two main brains. The internal competition is very fierce. Another cardinal, Birmingham, belongs to Pusmer's branch. Solanton and the deceased Manna both belong to this branch. In recent years, their power has been expanding rapidly. The last cardinal, Glallen, belongs to the Saintis faction. Compared to the other branches, the Saintis faction is much more low-key. Finally, I have to mention your teacher, Pari. Lord Pari is a true holy knight. He abides by the creed of being loyal to the light and protecting justice. He is known for his fairness and strictness. However, because he is too stubborn and doesn't know how to be flexible, he has offended almost every branch. So, his situation is not easy. With your wisdom, you should know which branch is the most suitable. Paul thought for a long time and sighed. Although the Saintis faction is the most low-key and the weakest among the three main branches, it is also one of the indispensable main branches. The Roman family doesn't have much background. If I choose the other two branches, I'm afraid that it will be difficult to be valued because of the limited competitiveness. Maybe I will never be able to stand out. So, I don't have much choice. It's so easy to talk to smart people. Eliza's expression became serious. Then, let me ask you one last time. Have you really made up your mind? Paul showed a determined expression and nodded slowly. That's great. I believe that the Saintis will be very happy to see such a talent with such potential join. Let me remind you that although the Saintis faction is low-key, the Lord Raphael behind us is not an angel of wisdom who is willing to stay out of the limelight. Paul was not stupid. He would not ask silly questions such as why Eliza, as Roger's niece, wanted to join the Saintis faction. In fact, he also knew that the reason why Eliza valued him so much was related to his identity as the disciple of the Paladin chief. It was very likely that the Saintis had the intention to rope in Pari and the Knights of Light. At least, it could be a signal to the outside world. It could also be related to a long-term plan of the Angel of Wisdom under the God of Light behind the Saintis. Eliza's previous analysis had hit the key point, allowing him to see further. In any case, the Saintis faction was indeed the most suitable faction for him and the Roman family. Paul finally made up his mind. He bowed to Eliza and said, "Then, please take care of me in the future, Mississippi." Eliza was the Saintis' direct disciple. Since he had decided to serve the Saintis, he definitely had to build a good relationship with Eliza. Why are you so polite? We will be very close in the future, so we can't be so distant. Eliza smiled like a flower. But before that, you have to prove your determination with action. Action? Since you have chosen the right path, do you need to change your original development plan in the Long Huang Empire? For example, a marriage with the Philip family? Paul's brows furrowed again. You mean? Eliza smiled and leaned close to Paul's ear. She whispered, "What if I want you to kill Joanna and truly prove your determination?" Paul was shocked. He did not expect that Eliza would put forward such a condition. She wanted him to kill his fiancée, who was also his best friend, with his own hands. Looking at the innocent and cute smile on the girl's face, Paul could not help but feel a chill in his heart. If I have to use this to prove myself, then I... Paul's breathing was a little rapid. His eyes were intertwined with a complicated expression. He seemed to be struggling in his heart. Finally, he clenched his teeth. I will kill Joanna with my own hands. Ha ha. Eliza laughed delicately. Her laughter was filled with a different meaning. After a while, her laughter gradually became softer. Actually, this is just a joke. But I'm very satisfied with your performance. You've already passed my test. After returning to Yanxiao capital, I'll return to White Cliff as soon as possible and report this matter to Her Holiness the Saintess. With the Saintess' support and your own strength, becoming a Divine Palace Knight is already in the bag. At that time, you can use your identity as a Temple Knight to gradually expand the family's strength in the Longhuang Empire. Even that Rex the Great will be afraid of you. Paul secretly breathed a sigh of relief. The reason why he pursued Joanna was that utilitarianism played a large role, but he had always been quite infatuated with Joanna's beauty. It was actually very difficult to make this decision just now, but for the sake of his future and ambition, not to mention that Joanna liked someone else, even if they really liked each other, he couldn't care so much. After you return to Yanxiao Kingdom this time, don't make too much movement in the family for the time being. After dealing with the necessary affairs, set off to White Cliff as soon as possible. Remember to bring your loyal follower. I'm a little interested in his talent of mind language. As for the duel, don't worry because if nothing goes wrong, your opponent should not appear. Paul was startled. Why? Because Joanna has already eloped with him, which will severely damage the Kraft family and the Philip family. It will also be of considerable benefit to your future development plan. Seeing the doubt on Paul's face, Eliza sat down again and stretched on the sofa. It doesn't hurt to tell you. It was actually my idea for Joanna to leave early. However, I asked the Knights of Light to escort her back not to the Crimson Dragon city of the Longhuang Empire, but to the Island of Storms. The port here is not very far from the Island of Storms. According to the itinerary, we should reach that sea area soon. What? The Island of Storms. Paul was taken aback. The Island of Storms was located in the dangerous sea area south of Garten City. It was one of the most dangerous places in the surface world. There were countless dangers hidden in it. The existence of the Titan alone could make a real saint-level powerhouse flinch. Equally surprised was Chenrui, who was hiding and eavesdropping. He was also present when Joanna left, but he did not expect such a thing to happen. This seemingly naive girl's scheming and viciousness were far beyond his expectations, which made Chenrui's killing intent surge. Chapter 656. Inside the room, Eliza's voice continued. Originally, I still felt guilty about this matter, whether it was towards you or Joanna. However, since you promised to kill Joanna with your own hands, I only feel guilty towards Joanna. After all, she's my good friend. Because of this, I couldn't bear to kill her directly and let her go to the Island of Storms. Maybe there's still a chance for her to survive. Although Eliza said that she felt guilty, there was no trace of guilt on her face. This made Paul shudder. With how dangerous the Island of Storms was, it would be hard for Paul to survive even if he went there himself, let alone Joanna. This time, Paul's inner struggle was much smaller than before. After all, he was very clear that Eliza did not completely trust him. Killing Joanna was to cut off his escape route and prevent him from being half-hearted. Oh, by the way, I sent someone to tell Samuel about Joanna being trapped in the Island of Storms yesterday afternoon. According to the information I received, he has already rushed to the Island of Storms to rescue her. Just in time, I can help you get rid of this annoying guy. Eliza's eyes flickered. You don't have to be too grateful to me. As a close comrade on the same side, this is what I should do. Chenrui's heart sank, and he didn't listen anymore. Without listening anymore, he left the room silently. It was not easy for him to gain Eliza and Paul's trust. Soon, he would be able to sneak into the White Cliff sect. Killing Eliza rashly would only result in a great loss. The most important thing now was to find a way to help Samuel and Joanna get out of danger. Chenrui immediately left the church and went to look for Lucio. As Chenrui's follower, Lucio had been mingling in the church during this period of time. However, he spent most of his time wandering around Garten City to inquire about all kinds of information. When Chenrui found Lucio, there was a familiar person beside him. It was Aina, the leader of the Iron Shield mercenary group. The place where the three of them met was a remote alley. However, Aina still looked around cautiously before taking out something and handing it to Chinrui. "This is what Samuel asked me to pass to you, although I don't know why he did it." The female mercenary did not hide her doubts. In fact, in the thick earth castle of the hill dwarves, Aina had already sensed that Samuel and Richard had a special relationship. However, the two of them had a quarrel and parted on bad terms, so she dispelled her suspicions. Unexpectedly, before Samuel left Garden City in a hurry yesterday, he had given Aina something and asked her to pass it to the Richard who had joined the church's church. This raised the suspicion in the mercenary's heart again. Due to the assassination attempt last night in one of the manors related to the church, Lord Kraut had ordered the city guards to search for unknown people overnight. Until now, the whole city was still in a state of martial law. The church's gates were also closed, and no one and no outsiders could enter. Aina had never met with Chinrui before. And Chinrui took the long package and opened it. There was a broken sword inside. It was the one he broke when he was giving pointers to Samuel. Samuel asked Aina to pass this sword to him as a farewell apology. This was because the Silverter Knight knew that he might not be able to return from the Island of Storms this time. He could no longer be loyal to His Royal Highness. "Do you know where he's going this time?" Chinrui asked. Aina shook her head and bit her lip. "He didn't say. He only told me a few strange things, but I can feel that he's going to do something extremely dangerous. I have to say, a woman's intuition is very accurate." Chinrui sighed. "This guy is leaving with the determination to die." Samuel did not ask Chinrui for help. For a true saint-level master, the Island of Storms was also a place full of danger. He could no longer fulfill his oath to His Royal Highness for the sake of his beloved woman. How could he involve His Royal Highness in danger? This shocked Aina. "Do you know where he's going? As a mercenary, you've already completed your mission." Chinrui shook his head. "You don't have to worry about the rest. This is not a mercenary." Aina looked angry. "I don't know what the relationship between you two is, but as a friend who cares about him, I have the right to know the truth. What kind of danger is he going to face?" Chinrui looked at Ina's agitated expression and suddenly understood something. He pondered and asked, "Do you know why I deliberately fell out with Iron Shield publicly? Because I don't want to drag you guys into this. If you're really not afraid of being dragged into this, you must have a certain level of awareness. At the very least, you must disassociate yourself from the Iron Shield mercenary group. You might even have to hide your identity for the rest of your life." Aina did not expect such serious consequences. She heard Chinrui add, "I'll only reveal one thing. This time, he risked his life to save his beloved woman. Are you sure you still want to get involved?" Aina was shocked. Her agitated emotions finally calmed down, and her eyes were filled with disappointment. "Go. Since he trusts you, I won't do anything unnecessary to you. But you must forget what happened today, including this item." Chinrui waved the broken sword in his hand, gave Lucio a look, and walked forward, leaving Aina standing there in a daze. After leaving the alley, Chinrui asked Lucio, "How much do you know about the Island of Storms?" "Master, what do you mean? The place that Samuel is going to is the Island of Storms?" Lucio was shocked, and immediately replied, "From Port Thor, south of Garden City, you can reach the Sea of Storms. If it's fast, it'll take about 2 days. 3 years ago, when I was completing a mercenary mission, I passed by that sea, but I didn't dare to go near it. If you were to go to the Island of Storms now, would you have the guts?" Lucio was shocked again. He hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, "If not for Master, I'd still be a half-dead piece of trash. Ever since I started following Master, my life has long been in Master's hands. Not to mention the Island of Storms, even if it's going to the realm of demons, I won't hesitate." The last sentence stunned Chinrui, and he immediately smiled. "The realm of demons? Don't worry, this trip to the Island of Storms won't cost your life. Go and get a small fishing boat immediately. Remember, the more inconspicuous, the better. Don't need a boatman or sailor, and don't bring any supplies. Oh, and also a related sea map. Fishing boat? Lucio thought he heard wrong. Master, I need at least a ship and a few sailors. The Sea of Storms isn't an inland river. Do as I say, the sooner the better. Chenrui thought for a moment. Also, I might leave Garden City soon and head to the Long Huang Empire, then to White Cliff. I don't know what kind of turmoil it will cause, but you have to die once and change your identity. That way, you can avoid being implicated. Ah? Lucio was stunned, but he immediately reacted. He bowed respectfully and did not ask any more questions. His strength was only an insignificant ant to the St. Richard, but this powerhouse that he had to look up to had even considered the details of his safety, and did not use any means of silencing him. No matter what, this was a master that was truly worth following. About 2 hours later, the fat city lord Kraut received urgent news from the patrols. The church's substitute knight of Radiance, Richard, had been ambushed by a group of unknown people in the 3rd Street. He was seriously injured, and his follower Lucio had unfortunately died. The fat city lord's heart tightened. In the past, he would not have needed to worry at all if a substitute knight of Radiance was injured. However, there had been an assassination attempt on the niece of the cardinal and disciple of the saintess, Elisa, in flagrant manner yesterday. In the end, Elisa had been seriously injured, and the priest of Gudan town, Mana, had been assassinated. This matter could very well affect his position as city lord. It was a sensitive period, and yet there had been a second assassination attempt on someone from the church. The two assassinations should be closely related, and it was very likely that they were the work of the same power. Soon after, the fat city lord received new information. This Richard was the person who had warned Elisa at the crucial moment yesterday, and was deeply appreciated by her. He had also become the #1 genius of the Long Huang Empire, a follower of the paladin head's disciple, Paul. God damn it, they're all people with connections that I can't afford to offend. The fat city lord's tears were about to fall, and he hurried to the scene personally to console and treat the seriously injured Richard. At this time, the church had also arrived, led by priests Solantan and Paul. Lord Paul! Chenrui revealed a strenuous expression, and was about to struggle to get up when Paul held him up. Richard! How are your injuries? I'll heal you with light magic right now! The fat city lord watched from the side, secretly apprehensive. It seemed like the relationship between Paul and this follower was not ordinary. Fortunately, he had not neglected him. Chenrui sneered inwardly. Paul was a ruthless character who would even personally dispose of the woman he loved for the sake of benefits. Doing this was just to win people's hearts, but he still cooperated and showed a moved expression. There's no need, Lord Paul. Lord Kraut has already sent people to treat me, and it's not a big deal. I'll be fine after 2 or 3 days of rest. It's just that my follower Lucio was poisoned by an assassin's dagger, even his corpse. What's going on? Paul looked at the wound Chenrui had created with camouflage, and his brows furrowed tightly. I don't know either. When I came out of the Church of Light, I found my follower Lucio and asked him to prepare some matters for departure. Suddenly, I was ambushed by a group of assassins. If not for the Thunderbird's warning, I would have died. I suspect these assassins might be related to the people in the manor last night. There were actually many witnesses to the assassination that Chenrui spoke of, but what those passers-by saw were only fragments created by Shura's magic. The real Lucio had already changed his face and went to Port Thor. Is it revenge for you reminding Eliza last night? Paul clenched his fist and lightly patted Chenrui's shoulder. That follower will not die in vain. I will not let this matter go. Eliza's injuries have not recovered, and I'll be staying here for a few days. Rest well, and when the time comes, come back to the Long Huang Empire with me. Yes, Lord Paul. After returning to the church, Solantan placed Chenrui in a clean room to recuperate, and Eliza came to visit him. To be precise, at this moment, Eliza was not visiting Chenrui, but Shura. Shinrei left a star in the church, and left Shura here to recuperate, and continue stealing the power of faith, while he rushed to Port Thor. Chapter 657. When Shinrei arrived at the port of Thor in a cloak, the disguised Lucio had already obtained a small boat and contacted the port guards, ready to set sail at any time. What surprised Shinrei was that there was another person on the boat. It was an unfamiliar woman. Even though she had changed her appearance, Shinrei could still recognize her at a glance. It was Aina. Shinrei glanced at Lucio, and Lucio lowered his head in shame. "It has nothing to do with Lucio," Aina said. "Before I met you with Samuel's broken sword, I had already secretly left a secret tracking green fennel on Lucio's body. I heard about the strange assassination and wanted to rush over to take a look, but I met Lucio in disguise on the way. Even though he had changed his appearance, he still could not hide the smell of the green fennel. So I followed him all the way and used this matter to threaten him to tell me his destination. It turns out that Samuel actually went to the Island of Storms. Speaking of the stormy sea, I am much more familiar with it than Lucio. I can shorten the journey by at least a quarter. Don't you need a guide?" Shinrei stared into Ayane's eyes. "Have you really thought it through?" Aina spread her hands. "My father was a merchant, but he died of a serious illness. I was forced to become a mercenary due to living conditions. I have always felt regret for not being able to inherit his will. This time, I have already given the position of leader to Silva. Before changing professions, I can help a friend along the way." "Merchant?" Shinrei stared at her for a moment, and suddenly smiled. "All right, merchant lady, if you have already decided, I think we can set off. Also, Lord Lucio, if you try your best and still can't get Miss Ayane's favor, I express my regret, because you have missed out on a very good woman." Ayane's face suddenly turned red. Lucio laughed awkwardly and began to push the boat away from the shore. The spearman's skills were very amateurish, and the fishing boat swayed out of the port. Aina had already returned to normal. She looked at Lucio, who was steering the boat with difficulty, and frowned. "Although I'm not the most professional guide, you guys seem to be more amateurs. Are we going to steer this small fishing boat to the stormy seas? I'm not sure what method you have to save Samuel, but what I can be sure of is that as long as a wave hits, not only me, but this big ship, this sailor, and you, the captain, will all be buried in the stomach of the fish." Before Aina could finish her sentence, a large ship suddenly appeared in front of the small boat. This was not the mocking words of the female mercenary, but a real large sailboat. It was completely black and magnificent, like a black pearl in the blue sea, giving people a strong visual impact. Not only Aina, but Lucio was also stunned. Where did this ship come from? Did he take it out of his spatial equipment? He had never heard of a space ring or bracelet being able to store such a large ship. What kind of method was this? At this time, Shinrei's voice had already come from the big sailboat. "Welcome to my devil's snare ship, Ms. Guide, and the amateur sailor." Aina and Lucio climbed onto the big ship by climbing the rope that was put down. They looked at everything in front of them in surprise. The two of them were also well-informed mercenaries, but many of the facilities on this ship were unheard of. Even the deck under their feet seemed to be made of very rare materials. "Master, such a big ship, Lucio just wanted to say that this sailor was more amateur than he thought, but he saw Shinrei take out a stone. The stone glowed yellow and scattered into countless blue sand on the deck. The sand began to move quickly and gathered into human figures. After the light dissipated, dozens of blue sandmen made of sand appeared in front of them. The sandmen were once wiped out in the battle with the corpse wizard King Glorios at the bottom of the Dead Sea, but the Earth Elemental King once gave Shinrei a piece of sandstone essence that could resurrect the sandmen 3 times. This was the first time. The Sandmen were naturally very familiar with Shinrei. They saluted together. Following Shinrei's order, they began to quickly act separately. They raised the sails, steered the ship, and looked out. They cooperated very well. Lucio and Aina stared at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. Lucio even bit his finger to see if he was dreaming. Ina was keenly aware that these monsters not only had extremely brilliant sailing skills, but they were all experienced old sailors. Moreover, none of them were weaker than her. What is the origin of this Richard? He can actually control such a powerful monster that has never been heard of. It seems that there are still many places that can't be automatically repaired from the previous battle damage, but it should be enough for the time being. Shinrei looked at the facilities of the Devil's Snare ship and turned his gaze to Ina, who was stunned. Okay, Ms. Guide, it's time for you to play your role. What we have to do now is to speed up and strive to reach the Island of Storms as soon as possible. Ina woke up from her dream and quickly took out the sea chart. After a day and a night, the Devil's Snare's ship finally sailed into the stormy sea. The stormy sea was just like its name. The entire sky was gray, and there was no sunlight all year round. From time to time, one could see the spectacle of a sea tornado like a waterspout. For the approaching ships, this spectacular scene was tantamount to a nightmare of the Grim Reaper. "Wait a minute, Captain, slow down first!" Ina shouted. She sincerely admired Shinrei's ability to command and sail. Although she noticed that Lucio had accidentally revealed the word master, the clever female mercenary pretended not to hear it and directly called Shinrei captain. The Island of Storms is not far from Garden City, but few people can enter it. In addition to the terrifying and powerful creatures on the island, the tornadoes of the stormy sea are also one of the important reasons. The tornadoes here are very terrifying. They can lift large ships hundreds of meters into the sky, and it is impossible to pass through directly. The tornadoes are affected by some mysterious force and will never disappear. Fortunately, they have a certain regularity of strength, but it must be noted that even if you pass through the weakest aftermath, there is still the danger of being overturned at any time. Generally speaking, it is best to have a wind or water mage who can use the corresponding elemental power to appropriately offset the impact and reduce the danger. Only then can it be possible to pass. Shinrei took the sea chart and looked at it carefully for a while, then looked at the few tornadoes in front of him. He gave an order to the Sandmen, and the Devil's Snare ship sailed straight and fast. "Captain?" Ina was shocked. She didn't expect that her painstaking explanation would be in vain. This course might be the fastest route to the Island of Storms, but it was also the area where the storm was the most raging. There were terrifying tornadoes in front of them. The sea was surging violently, and the wind was howling in their ears. This was only the periphery. The Devil's Snare ship had already activated its magic thrusters, and it was sailing through the waves. Lucio nervously grabbed the handrail of the ship, and the sweat on his face was blown away by the howling wind. The Sandmen did not hesitate at all, and faithfully carried out Shinrei's orders. Ina was about to stop him loudly, but she saw Shinrei's figure slowly float up. Richard is not just a beastmaster? Or a wind mage? However, even a high-level wind mage would not be able to control such violent wind elements, let alone face the strongest tornado head-on. A sonic boom sounded, covering the howling wind for a while. The figure was like a meteor, flying straight towards the tornado. Feeling the increasingly chaotic and manic airflow rushing towards him, his black eyes suddenly turned with star-like brilliance, and the power of his whole body evaporated like flames. In the next second, Ina and Lucio saw an unforgettable scene at the same time. A hazy figure faced the terrifying tornado at lightning speed, and then punched out. The entire field of vision seemed to tremble violently. The huge tornado that connected the sky and the sea suddenly split into two halves. Affected by this terrifying force, the seawater below was split into two halves and rolled back like a canyon that had been split open. "Go!" Shinrei's voice sounded, completely covering the sound of the howling wind. The Devil's Snare ship immediately turned on the magic thrusters at full speed, and the curvature of the sails swelled to the limit. The ship sailed towards the canyon, like a sharp arrow. Ina and Lucio stared dumbfoundedly at the water walls that were tens of meters high on both sides of the ship. Under the effect of that incomparably powerful force field, they could not fall for a while. It was not until the Devil's Snare ship sailed through the stormy sea that the seawater behind it calmed down and returned to its original state. However, the huge hurricane turned into two small tornadoes, and its power was greatly reduced. It slowly moved to both sides under the remaining force of the punch. Chenrui's figure had already returned to the ship, as if he had just done a trivial thing, and continued to look at the sea chart. After a long time, Aina finally reacted. A simple punch tore such a terrifying tornado into two halves? This is a wind mage? Or is this a beastmaster? The strength displayed by this punch alone far exceeded the strength of Samuel. A real saint level? The mercenary finally understood why Richard's words made the always persistent deputy leader immediately give up the intention to fight when Samuel and Tai Ruo Lin clashed at the Black Rock Mountain. It seemed that the previous guess was wrong. The relationship between this Richard and Samuel was probably right. There was also the reason why they passed through the thick earth castle smoothly. Miss Aina, come over and confirm. This direction should be the fastest way to go south. Are there any reef areas or other obstacles on the way? Chenrui's voice woke the mercenary up from her reverie, and she quickly stepped forward to confirm carefully. In the following voyage, Chenrui successively defeated several storms. With the powerful power and balance of the Devil's Snare ship, the journey was smooth and unimpeded. It was as if this was not the most dangerous stormy sea, but a lake with a little cool breeze. Aina and Lucio were already a little numb to this. The two of them were in a state of calling the bull demon king out to see Jesus. As they stood at the bow of the ship, leisurely, watching the tornado and the spectacular sight of it being dissected, until an island appeared in their sight. Island of Storms. Chapter 658. The area of the Island of Storms was much larger than the hidden misty island in the Sea of Death. Unlike the raging storms in the outer sea, there were no hurricanes around the Island of Storms, which was shrouded in thick fog. It was as if the tornadoes were a barrier around the Island of Storms. Roar! The sound of beasts roaring and slapping the surface of the water came from the fog. The roars soon turned into a whine. Aina knew that at least two giant nether snakes were finished. This kind of ferocious sea beast hidden in the fog, which made adventurers tremble with fear, was simply a tragedy when it encountered the even more ferocious Richard. Aina and Lucio were quite immune to this kind of situation. Compared to breaking the tornadoes with their bare hands, this was child's play. There seems to be a ship on the shore in front. Chenrui's voice came from the air. Turn 18 degrees southeast. Quick, get close! The Devil's Snare ship quickly approached. Sure enough, they saw two ships moored on the shore. One ship was fragmented, seemingly attacked by a giant nether snake. The other was relatively intact. There were no living people on either ship, only corpses. The two ships should have arrived at the same time. The corpses on the ship that arrived first were man-made. Judging from their attire, they were ordinary crew members. They had died more than a day ago. The ship that arrived later, which was suspected to have been attacked by a nether snake, should be Samuel's. The cause of death was obviously caused by sea beasts. Judging from the remaining bloodstains, the time of death was less than 12 hours. That was to say, Samuel had not been ashore for a long time. Chenrui looked at the magic compass that could not be used due to strong interference. Wait for me here. I'll go with you. Items like the magic map can't be used here. Aina glanced at the specially made magic eye compass. I've completed 2 harvesting missions here, so I'm more familiar with the surrounding terrain than you are. It should be of help. Seeing the mercenary's firm eyes, Chenrui pondered for a while and nodded. He ordered Lucio and the Sandmen to stay on the shore. With the firepower and sturdiness of the Devil's Snare ship, even if it encountered a surprise attack from sea beasts, it could still cope. At this moment, somewhere on Storm Island, Samuel, whom Chenrui was looking for, was in a fierce battle. There were corpses lying all over the ground. Some of them were the guards who came with Samuel, and the rest were naturally the enemies. Behind Samuel was Joanna, who was being protected by several guards. Although many of the enemies had died, the remaining ones were all elites. There were about 30 of them, and they formed an encirclement. At the front was an armored swordsman, and at the back was a magician with a wand. In terms of individual strength, none of the enemies were a match for Samuel. However, these enemies were all well trained and had a special combination formation that could disperse Samuel's powerful attacks to everyone in the formation, greatly reducing the damage. In addition, they deliberately targeted Joanna's attacks, causing Samuel to be unable to attend to one thing and lose sight of the other. For a moment, he was in a deadlock. The last guard of the Tribbett family fell, and Samuel's figure flashed in front of Joanna. The long sword in his hand twisted out a circle of arc light. Blood splashed everywhere, and 2 swordsmen who approached were cut in half. A large amount of blood splashed on Joanna's long dress, and the stench went straight into her nostrils. The young lady resisted the fear and didn't make a sound. She was afraid of distracting Samuel, and her nails had already dug deep into her flesh. "Dawn extinction!" As Samuel shouted, there was another sword in his hand. A huge light mark appeared under his feet. As the 2 swords were waved, countless criss-cross sharp rays spread around. Compared with the past, this move had been simplified a lot. It didn't have too many dazzling effects, but its power had increased instead. It was the result of Samuel's improvement after listening to Chinray's opinion. After the light dissipated, the surrounding swordsmen fell in a circle, and even many of the mages in the rear were killed by this move. Not long ago, Samuel used this move. At that time, the mages used a magic barrier combined with a special formation to offset most of the power, and only 4 enemies were killed. This time, the lethality was several times that of the last time. It was not that Samuel hid his strength before, but he suddenly realized another wonderful use of dawn extinction at the moment of crisis. The 2 long swords in Samuel's hands only had a hilt left. It turned out that he deliberately compressed his power just now, crushed the blades, and sprayed them around in the light of dawn extinction. He broke through the surface with a single point, effectively penetrating the barrier of the mages, and achieved decisive results. Although Samuel continuously used up a lot of power, only the 2 leaders of the enemy's swordsmen were left standing, and the mages in the back were almost exhausted of their magic power. They were basically no threat, as if they were wolves who had lost their claws and teeth. As expected of someone who has entered the saint level. The leader of the swordsmen covered the wound on his abdomen that had been pierced by a short blade, and blood kept flowing between his fingers. "We used all methods, but we still couldn't win when you had to take care of the hostages. You are the Knights of Light? Tell me who is behind you. This is your only chance to live." Samuel's endurance had greatly improved. He quickly adjusted his breathing, and with a wave of his hand, a long sword on the ground appeared in his hand. Even if it was not a weapon that suited him, it was enough to deal with the remaining soldiers. "You don't need to know." The swordsman smiled coldly, as if he didn't care about life and death at all. Samuel knew at a glance that they were men of sacrifice. "Mr. Herbert, did Eliza ask you to do this?" Joanna's trembling voice was heard. The 2 leaders of the swordsmen, Herbert and Lorenz, were the Knights of Light that Eliza had sent to escort her back to Crimson Dragon City. This return to Crimson Dragon City was Eliza's idea, and the purpose was to get rid of Paul. What surprised Joanna was that she didn't go to Vegas Town, which led to Crimson Dragon City. Instead, she was taken to the most dangerous place, Storm Island. If this was ordered by her good friend Eliza. "I'm sorry, Miss Joanna. You won't get an answer here," Lorenz said. Lorenz opened his mouth. "I admit that we are no match for Samuel, but the real losers are you. You will all die here." Samuel didn't give his enemies time to recover. He snorted coldly and was about to finish them off when his expression suddenly changed. The ground began to tremble, as if something huge was gradually approaching. "Ah!" In the forest, Ione's surprised voice rang out. This was a completely black mutated wind leopard. Its strength had already reached C rank, far surpassing the tamed wind leopard beside Mana. With Ione's D rank strength, there was no way she could defend against it, and she was about to be pushed to the ground. However, the wind leopard's movements stopped abruptly. A hand was gripping the wind leopard's neck, and with a casual fling, the ferocious beast was thrown away like a kitten. God knew how many branches were broken, but in the end, it relied on its feline instincts to barely regain its balance in the air. It rolled a few times on the ground, got up again, and limped away into the depths of the forest. "Are you all right?" Chinrei's voice was heard. In fact, the guide, who was familiar with the terrain, had actually gotten lost when she was leading her employer through the forest. Chinrei had no choice but to scout ahead, and when he returned, he happened to save the mercenary who had been ambushed by the wind leopard. "I'm sorry." Aina lowered her head guiltily. She felt that her strength was as weak as a newborn baby in this place. If it wasn't for Richard, she wouldn't have been able to move an inch. She had originally wanted to help, but now she had become a burden. "Now isn't the time to talk about this." Chinrei knew that Aina was worried about Samuel, so he couldn't blame her. He extended his hand. "I've already found a way out. Let's go through the air." Aina nodded and grabbed his arm with both hands. Chinrei bounced off his feet, and his whole body rose into the air. At this moment, Chinrei, who had fully released his mental strength, heard a faint sound in the wind. It seemed to be some kind of angry roar. Chinrei's eyes flashed, and he yelled at Aina, "Hold on tight!" In the basin, Samuel panted heavily, and looked at the huge figure in front of him vigilantly. It was a person, a man. However, this man was too tall. He was about 10 meters tall, with a head of short golden hair, and a pair of eyes that flashed with a pale golden light. His skin was dark silver like metal, and he wore simple armor. His whole body emitted a terrifying aura. When Samuel flew forward and attacked with all his strength, it only left a dent on the dark silver skin, and it quickly returned to its original state. The most powerful creature on the Island of Storms, the Titan. The Titan was a top-notch existence that could directly use its physical strength to fight against the giant dragons. It also possessed powerful elemental energy, could perform long-range attacks, and was immune to all negative psychic magic. Samuel did not want to take the initiative to attack such a dangerous and powerful creature. He originally wanted to escape with Joanna, but Herbert and Lorenz led the magicians to entangle the two of them. Finally, the huge figure of the Titan appeared in Joanna's horrified eyes. The Titan did not distinguish between friend and foe. In their eyes, all other races were invaders that must be killed. As soon as the Titan appeared, a magician was trampled into meat paste. Herbert and a few other magicians were also turned into nothingness by the Titan's lightning. Lorenz was also injured by the aftershock, and both his legs were charred, and he fell to the ground, unable to move. If it were not for Samuel carrying Joanna and dodging quickly, he would have followed in the footsteps of Herbert and the others. This Titan's strength was at least 2 ranks higher than Samuel's. Coupled with the Titan's powerful talent and combat strength, there was no way he could fight it. With Samuel's current physical strength, it would be difficult for him to escape alone, let alone carry Joanna. Therefore, the Silvertear Knight chose to fight to the death. Unfortunately, he had used up too much of his strength, and his desperate attack could not even break through the Titan's skin. "Ha ha! Do you understand now?" Lorenz, who was lying on the ground, was in so much pain that his face was contorted, and he was sweating profusely. However, he still laughed out loud. "I'll say it one last time. Let's die together!" Samuel gritted his teeth and leaped high into the air. He swung his sword and slashed at the Titan again. However, the effect was worse this time. He had to roll a few times to avoid the Titan's stomp, and he quickly pulled away from the Titan. The Silvertear Knight was panting heavily. Suddenly, he sensed something and turned around to look at Joanna. Even though he was far away, he could still clearly see her gaze. In those beautiful deep blue eyes, there was no longer the fear and anxiety from before. There was only a sense of tranquility that surpassed fear, a sense of having no regrets in life or death. Samuel felt the blood in his chest burning again. His entire life force was burning. With a loud roar, his body exploded with a bright light, and a powerful aura surged towards the Titan. At this moment, he had surpassed his own limits. The Titan's pale golden eyes flashed, and a trace of disdain flashed across its eyes as it faced the surging power. It let out a low growl, and a violent aura surged forward to meet the attack head-on. The two auras were locked in a stalemate in the air, and the ground shook violently. Long and narrow cracks appeared on the ground, and the soil and stones nearby were blown up by the air currents like a small hurricane. Even though Samuel had used his life immolation to its fullest potential, the difference in strength between the two was still too great. The Silvertear Knight could not hold on for much longer, and his feet were pushed back involuntarily, leaving 2 deep trenches in the ground. In the blink of an eye, the Titan's speed increased, and his aura was suppressed to its lowest point. Finally, he could not hold on any longer, and his entire body was flung away by the huge force. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and Samuel, who had lost his balance, was supported by a gentle force. He slowly descended to the ground, and 2 people appeared behind him, a man and a woman. Lorenz looked at the familiar-looking man in surprise, and blurted out, "Richard? Wasn't this Richard the Beastmaster that Miss Eliza had some admiration for? He had even used his special privileges to pass the Radiant Knight's test. Why was he here?" The appearance of the 2 people shocked Samuel at first, and he immediately walked up to Chunrui, his eyes filled with excitement and shame. He lowered his head and knelt on one knee. This action represented an absolute difference in status. Not only Joanna and Ina, who knew Samuel's arrogant character, but even Lorenz was shocked. A Saint-tier powerhouse was actually kneeling to a mediocre beastmaster. Chunrui understood Samuel's feelings very well, and did not say anything. He only patted his shoulder, signaling for him to stand up. At this moment, the Titan, who felt that he was being ignored, was filled with murderous intent, and took large strides towards them. The Titan had only taken 2 steps when his movements stopped abruptly. A figure had appeared in front of him. It was Chunrui. Chunrui's height could only be considered small compared to the Titan's huge body, but the Titan's eyes were filled with extreme wariness, as if he was the one who needed to look up to this tiny figure. The Titan's aura immediately surged, and electricity crackled in his palms. Before the Titan could attack, Chunrui suddenly growled. The Titan's movements froze, and his huge body was actually sent flying by an invisible force. Boom! He crashed into a mound in the distance, and the ground shook violently as a human-shaped pit appeared in the mound. Apart from Samuel, everyone else was completely stunned by this scene. Just his aura alone had sent the Titan flying. This was a Titan that could easily suppress Samuel's Saint-tier strength. Chapter 659. The Titan slowly got up and roared angrily. A bolt of lightning flew out of his hand and towards Chunrui. The Titan's long-range attack was different from the magic cast by mages. They were more like materializing the power of the elements, and then throwing it like a javelin. This lightning contained scorching heat and high pressure, enough to melt metal in an instant. The Titan's throwing speed was quite amazing, several times more powerful than the previous blow against the Knight of Light. The lightning suddenly stopped. This was a javelin about 7 meters long, surrounded by dozens of powerful electric snakes. Not far from the javelin was a palm, and it was the power of this palm that stopped the lightning from going any further. Chunrui felt the manic electricity, and suddenly clenched his 5 fingers. The javelin trembled slightly and disappeared with a bang. The Titan Giant's strongest lightning talent attack had been crushed by a single hand. Lorenz, whose legs had been destroyed by the aftermath of the lightning, could not believe his eyes. He finally understood why even a person as powerful as Samuel would kneel down. Richard was definitely a true saint, and had probably reached the peak of the saint level. Such a top powerhouse hid his strength, and did not hesitate to become a Knight of Light candidate. Even Samuel, the second son of the Longhuang Empire's family, was a follower of this person. There was definitely a terrible conspiracy. Chunrui did not give the Titan a second chance to release lightning. He appeared in front of the Titan in a flash and punched the Titan in the chest. Compared to the Titan's huge body, his fist could only be described as insignificant. However, it was precisely this tiny punch that exploded with terrifying power. A dent appeared in the Titan's metal chest armor, and a massive wave of power penetrated the armor and spread throughout the Titan's body, destroying every bit of resistance. The Titan let out a painful roar, and his huge body flew out again, leaving another pit on the ground. He could not stand up for a while. Lorenz smiled bitterly. Too strong. This kind of strength is probably comparable to White Cliff's strongest paladin, Chief Pari. With the intervention of such a powerhouse, it is impossible to complete the mission given by Eliza this time. I must find a way to escape and pass these important messages to Ms. Eliza. The strength of this Titan was close to the demon overlord. His strength and physique were A+, and his spirit was A+. Only his speed attribute was relatively low, which was B+. With Chenrui's strength, it was not difficult to kill the opponent, but he did not kill because in the race column of analytical eyes, it was impressively Titan alchemy life form. The first time Chenrui came into contact with alchemy lifeforms was in the Lobe mine in the Demon Realm's White Feather Estate. Then he experienced an unforgettable dream, and became the master of the ancient alchemy civilization ruins and many alchemy lifeforms. Those lamp spirits had now become the strongest female imperial guards of the fallen angel palace, guarding the safety of Jia. In the memory of the ancient alchemy civilization obtained by Chenrui, there was no existence of alchemy lifeforms like the Titan. I don't know if it is related to the ancient alchemy civilization, or there is an inheritor of the ancient alchemy civilization like me in this storm island? Lorenz had already supported his body with his hands and secretly moved backward. Chenrui suddenly frowned and glanced at Lorenz. Lorenz suddenly felt that the sky had darkened. Before he could react, his whole body had been trampled into meat paste by a huge foot. Another Titan giant. This Titan was more burly than the one who was knocked down by Chenrui. There was an extra helmet on his head, his pale silver skin faintly glowed green, and his golden eyes were brighter. His strength was S, intermediate stage of the demon overlord. Judging from the tremor of the ground, more than one Titan was approaching this basin. Samuel, take them away! Chenrui yelled at Samuel. Ina, you lead the way and wait for me on the ship. Samuel had already reacted. He would only be a burden to Royal Highness if he stayed here. He quickly carried Joanna and retreated with Ina. The intermediate stage of the demon overlord Titan was about to attack Samuel and the others who were escaping. Chenrui's figure instantly appeared in front of him, and a dazzling white light ball flew out. The diameter of this light ball was 5 meters. It was an enlarged version of Aurora Shot. The Titan sensed the powerful destructive power contained in it, so he immediately gave up the intention of attacking Samuel and the others. He opened his palms and made a defensive posture. The moment the Titan came into contact with the Aurora Shot, his entire giant body trembled. There was a strenuous look on his face. He involuntarily took a step back, then another step. The heavy footsteps sounded like the beating of a giant drum. The rhythm was getting faster and faster. The light ball only gradually disappeared after he retreated for nearly 200 meters. The armor on the Titan's body was deformed due to the huge pressure. Silver liquid similar to blood overflowed from his mouth and nose. The physique and strength of this Titan were still above Chenrui's estimation. It seemed that the Titan did have physical strength comparable to the dragon's. Of course, Chenrui deliberately compressed the power of this Aurora Shot. Before figuring out the relationship between the Titans and the ancient alchemy civilization, he didn't want to cause excessive hatred from the Titans. The pale golden eyes of the repelled Titan glowed fiercely. Chenrui felt that the surrounding airflow began to spin uncontrollably. It was full of manic and violent power. In the blink of an eye, he had been wrapped in a black storm. The momentum was terrifying. Obviously, this was a Titan with storm talent, also known as the Storm Titan. The storm continued to spin at a high speed. Lightning flashed and thunder roared inside. The sand and stones in this area were flying. It was almost impossible to see. After a long time, it gradually stopped. The Titan's golden eyes suddenly showed shock. He saw a figure walking out as if nothing had happened in the gradually subsiding sand and dust. The blue round shield around him gradually disappeared as if it was just a cool breeze just now. At this time, there were 4 more Titans in the basin. The first Titan who was knocked down also got up and surrounded Shinrei. There were a total of 3 demon overlords and 3 demon emperors. The strongest was a pale golden-skinned Titan who had reached the strength of S+. Even Shinrei didn't dare to underestimate him. Shinrei's mind moved, and a special spirit power was emitted. This spirit power contained the power of the spiritual imprint from the ancient alchemy civilization. With Shinrei's current realm, he could already control the breath of this imprint freely. The Titans felt the breath of the ancient alchemy civilization's spiritual imprint, and their movements paused. However, something unexpected happened to Shinrei. The Titans roared together, and their roars were full of anger. This was beyond Shinrei's expectation. He felt the unprecedented hatred and murderous intention from the Titans' emotions from the analytical eyes. He was taken aback and quickly sent out a communication consciousness. "Please wait, I have no malicious intent." The Titans ignored his explanation. A ball of golden lightning appeared in the hands of the pale golden-skinned Titan, and he threw it at Shinrei. The power of this ball of lightning was far from comparable to that of the Demon Emperor-level Titan. Shinrei couldn't easily catch it with his bare hands like last time. A light blue defensive shield suddenly appeared in front of him. After the protective shield was upgraded to a defensive shield, its ability to absorb and defend was greatly strengthened, and it was more useful than before. As long as it did not collapse, it could be retracted and released repeatedly. It could also recover the defensive power slowly. The previous storm of the Storm Titan didn't even leave a crack on the defensive shield. At this moment, facing the golden lightning of the peak stage of the Demon Overlord Titan, it once again showed a powerful defense. After the lightning dissipated, the nearby land and rocks had been melted into crystals by the high temperature of the lightning, but the defensive shield remained intact. There were only a few more cracks. The golden lightning came again. This time, Shinrei didn't take it head-on. His figure flickered, and he instantly appeared in another direction. Then, he teleported again to avoid another Titan stomp. The 6-star evolved teleportation skill had no limit on the number of times, but if it was used continuously it would consume a considerable amount of spirit power. Moreover, in the battle of the Demon Overlord level or even higher, due to the distance and speed, pure teleportation was no longer of much use unless it was a higher level of teleportation, such as the one Saint Dragon once performed in the territory of the Tower of Destruction. The Titan's physique and strength were very powerful. Their close combat ability was enough to rival the giant dragon, and they also had an extremely firm will. Their only weakness was their movement speed. Shinrei used this to fully exert his speed advantage. While dodging and fighting in the lightning and storm, he secretly calculated the time when Samuel and the others left. Boom! A small hill was punched through by the Storm Titan's fist, but Shinrei had already moved behind the Titan before the fist arrived. He used the Aura Blade in his hand and slashed out horizontally. The Storm Titan only had time to lean sideways, barely avoiding the vital point. The armor on its back suddenly had a few meters-long blade mark, and silver blood oozed out. The Storm Titan cried out in pain, and a hurricane spun at high speed around its body. Shinrei had already dodged 100 meters away. Before he could launch a second attack, he immediately sensed the golden lightning whistling from behind. A light flashed in Shinrei's hand, and a soft ripple appeared. When the golden lightning encountered this ripple, it was pulled away. Instead, it shot into the black hurricane 100 meters away. The golden light in the black hurricane flourished, and the lightning and thunder stopped abruptly. Only the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground could be heard. After the dust dispersed, the Storm Titan had fallen to the ground. Its body was constantly convulsing in the golden lightning arc. Although it was not dead, it obviously lost its combat power. The pale golden-skinned Titan was furious. As he was about to launch another attack, he saw Shinrei's figure soaring into the sky. Immediately afterward, all the Titans felt their bodies become dozens of times heavier in an instant. They couldn't stand steadily and fell to the ground. Gravity was more lethal to the heavier the enemy. This was also the only magic that Chenrei had. It was from the Earth Elemental King's elemental blessing, coupled with the S++ spirit power, made the Titans fall to the ground. Perhaps they heard the call of their companions' roars. The same roars echoed one after another in the distance. It sounded like there were a lot of them. Chenrei couldn't help but shudder. Whether it was the demon realm or the human world, demon emperors and demon overlord powerhouses were very rare. Now that he plunged into the Titan's nest of the Island of Storms, the weakest Titan was also at the demon emperor level. He didn't know what more terrifying existence was there. Calculating the time, Samuel and the other two should have arrived at the Demandra's snare ship. Chenrei didn't want to continue fighting. He cast the flying, light explosion, skill, turned into light, and disappeared in the distant sky like lightning. If he flew in the direction of the whistling sound, he would be able to see that there was a special type of humanoid existence among the Titans rushing over. These mysterious humanoid figures were floating in the air and were about 2 meters tall. The lower half of their bodies was a whirlwind-like air current that faintly emitted sparks. Chapter 660. Due to Chenrei's departure, the power of the gravity spell gradually weakened. The Titan with light golden skin was the first to stand up. At this time, there were more than 20 giant figures near the basin. There were also dozens of green humanoid figures whose lower bodies were whirlwinds. The strange thing was that the Titans, who had always hated the other worldlings, did not attack these green humanoid figures. Instead, they seemed to have a tacit understanding with each other. A cyan silhouette slowly flew into the basin and sensed the residual gravity spell's aura. His eyes suddenly flashed like lightning, and he let out a sharp roar. His figure flashed and disappeared. The silhouettes behind him let out a long roar in response. They soared into the sky and quickly followed the green silhouette. As Chenrei just left the basin area and was about to fly toward the direction of the Devil's Snare ship, he suddenly heard a sharp long whistle behind him. With his hearing, he could hear that one of the long whistles containing a powerful force was approaching quickly. The speed was so fast that it was not inferior to his sonic boom skill. Chenrei's mind moved, and he immediately cast sonic boom to change his direction. When he was at a rock mountain on the flying island, he suddenly slowed down and landed. He cast breath holding and stealth to hide his figure. Soon, a cyan shadow appeared in his line of sight. Its speed was astonishingly fast. The cyan shadow seemed to have sensed something. It stopped flying at high speed and looked around vigilantly. Chenrei finally saw the whirlwind form of the person's lower body, and his heart involuntarily trembled. At the same time, the corresponding information was displayed in the analytical eyes. Race, Wind Elementals. Comprehensive Strength Assessment, S+, Physique S+, Strength S+, Spirit S+, Agility S+. Analysis, Wind Element, Wind Magic Immunity Innate Speed. Danger Level, High. It's actually a wind elemental. It turned out that on the Island of Storms, in addition to powerful creatures like the Titan Giants, there were also wind elementals. When Chenrei thought of the environment of Storm Island, he seemed to have understood something. The wind elemental in front of him gave him a very strange feeling. It seemed to have a mysterious breath that surpassed the ordinary peak stage of the demon overlord. He had felt this kind of breath on the 3 elemental kings. The upgraded, analytical eyes' analysis data was more detailed, showing that his speed and spirit power had reached a level of S++. Then this wind elemental was likely to be one of the 3 light kings. At this moment, dozens of green figures in the air behind him came one after another. They were all wind elementals. When the previous wind elemental raised his hand, the rest of the wind elementals behind him stopped and kept a certain distance. They didn't dare to get too close. This action further confirmed Chenrei's guess. Wind Elemental King. The wind elementals were the enemies of the earth elementals. They had the fastest speed talent among all the elementals, and they could also manipulate the extremely aggressive wind magic. The overall strength of the wind elementals in the human world surpassed any kind of elemental in the demon realm. In the demon realm, there was no demon overlord level elite elemental under the command of the third kings of darkness. However, there were 4 demon overlord level wind elementals and 10 demon emperor level wind elementals by the wind elemental king's side. Shinrei once heard more mention that the level of the elite elementals had a lot to do with the origin fragment. Among the third kings of darkness, the water elemental king Lambos, the only water elemental king who had the origin fragment of water, benefited from Shinrei's gift. The dark elemental king Hago risked his life for the origin fragment of darkness, and he was still trapped in the Tower of Destruction. The wind elemental king must have the origin fragment of wind in his hand. The wind elemental king's sensing ability was extremely keen. He actually noticed the abnormality and ordered the wind elementals to search around. Fortunately, Shinrei's breath-holding and stealth skills were very amazing. In addition, he also had S++ spirit power, so he was not exposed. Shinrei suddenly thought of the wind source power needed by Rala's elemental kingdom. His mind turned quickly. At this moment, there were heavy footsteps behind him. It turned out that the Titans were coming. To Shinrei's surprise, the Titans were obviously on the same side as the wind elementals. Not only did they not have any conflict, but they also cooperated in the search. The two groups of people searched for a long time without any results. The wind elemental king looked puzzled, and he finally did not stay any longer. He greeted the Titans, and his figure continued to fly forward like lightning. The Titans followed behind with heavy steps. The Island of Storms was by no means a friendly place. If Shinrei wanted to obtain the wind source power from the wind elemental king, perhaps he could only resort to force. The elemental king's strength level was limited to the peak stage of the demon overlord for some reason, but in fact, they all had the power of origin. Their combat power was far from comparable to ordinary peak stage of the demon overlord. Coupled with the wind elemental's super speed talent, Shinrei might not be able to win steadily without using the polar star transformation. Moreover, there were elite wind elementals and demon overlord level titans. Including the wind elemental king, there were 7 peak stage of the demon overlord alone. If he attacked rashly, perhaps even escaping would be a problem. Shinrei himself didn't know what kind of power the polar star transformation could achieve, but the condition of consuming 10,000 faith crystals made him not think too much. Every faith crystal was extremely precious now. He must hold it in his hand and not squander it. There were priorities. After the 6-star evolution, the validity period of the star point was extended to 3 years. As long as there were enough faith crystals, Shinrei could return to the human world from the demon realm to obtain the wind source power next time. At present, Isabella's matter was the most urgent, and there was not much time left. He must first gather 1 million to return to the demon realm. Seeing that the Titan's figure was gradually disappearing, Shinrei sneaked silently in the opposite direction. He advanced cautiously all the way. After spending some time, he finally reached the shore where the Devil's Snare ship was located. After boarding the ship, Shinrei immediately gave the order to leave, and the Sandman began to raise the sails and set sail quickly. "Captain!" Samuel didn't dare to call Shinrei, "Your Highness," directly because he was worried about Lucio and the others. After the Devil's Snare ship left the Island of Storms, he only managed to say this title after a long time. This time, not only did he fail the Oath of Allegiance that day, but in the end, Your Highness personally risked his life to rescue him and Joanna. The Silver Knight's heart was full of shame and guilt. "Okay, cut the crap." Shinrei patted Samuel's shoulder. "When you return to the Long Huang Empire this time, defeat Paul in front of everyone. Also, keep my matter a secret for the time being. Don't disclose it to anyone, including my father." "Yes, Your Highness." "Captain, I understand." Samuel didn't say anything more. He just silently kept his gratitude in his heart. "Those two ladies. What's going on?" Shinrei glanced at Joanna and Aina, who were talking intimately at the stern with a strange look. "Sir Silver Knight, It seems that your coordination ability in certain aspects is far beyond my imagination. I didn't do anything, Samuel said innocently. It's just that when we evacuated, Ina was bitten by a venomous snake in the woods to protect Joanna. Later, I helped Ina suck the poison out, and then, when we returned to the ship, Joanna pulled Ina aside to talk. She hasn't talked to me since. The legendary poison sucking to heal wounds? Chenrui looked at the white gauze wrapped around Ina's thigh, and a look of realization appeared on his face. The Silver Knight had goosebumps when he saw that strange look in his eyes. Fortunately, His Highness didn't continue gossiping. Although it's dangerous this time, you should have gained a lot. What you need to do now is to meditate on these gains and stabilize your new small breakthrough. I was originally considering whether to use another external force to enhance your strength, but now it seems that it's not necessary. Samuel nodded with strong confidence in his eyes. I will definitely defeat Paul. I'll return this to you. Chenrui handed something over, and Samuel took a look. It turned out to be the broken sword. For a moment, all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart, and he bowed deeply to Chenrui. Chenrui nodded slightly and smiled in return. Not far away, Lucio saw Samuel's respectful expression and was surprised, but he tactfully didn't ask much. With Chenrui around, the Devil's Snare ship sailed out of the stormy sea area smoothly. It didn't return to the port of Garden City, but sailed southwest to the sea area of Vegas town. Ina, are you really not going back to the Long Huang Empire with us? Joanna looked at Ina in surprise. We can be the best of friends, and I want to ask you to be my bridesmaid at my wedding in the future. Ina glanced at Samuel and smiled. We are already good friends. I will definitely attend your wedding. He knows how to find me. Chenrui on the side could clearly see that the two ladies were not as harmonious as they seemed on the surface. Samuel was likely to suffer. As someone who had been through it, Chenrui patted Samuel's shoulder gloatingly. Take care. The duel was imminent. Samuel took Joanna from Vegas town to the Crimson Dragon city of the Long Huang Empire by water. Ina had left the mercenary group, saying that she wanted to fulfill her father's last wish to try to do business. Lucio, who had died once, changed his appearance and decided to follow Ina. Of course, the spearman also had some small calculations in his mind. Chenrui put away the Devil's Snare ship, used the method taught by the Earth Elemental King to store the Sandmen into the essence of Earth, cast the Stargate, and immediately returned to the church in Garden City. In the church in Garden City, Shura had completely stolen the faith power of Garden City. As a wounded, recuperating, it didn't arouse any suspicion. Eliza's injury was almost healed, and she was preparing to set off for the Yanxiao Kingdom. Paul accompanied and escorted her, so Chenrui naturally had to go together. Paul had received the dual notice from the Long Huang Empire. After escorting Eliza to the Yanxiao Kingdom this time, he would return directly to the Long Huang Empire to participate in the duel hosted by Emperor Rex. His opponent was the Silver Knight of the Empire and the second son of the Naturally family, Samuel. After the duel, Paul would go to White Cliff to participate in the selection of the Temple Knights. Chapter 661. Richard, what are you thinking about? You seem to be in a daze all the way here? Paul jumped off the horse and handed the reins to the attendant at the courier station. Looking at Chenrui's dazed look, he asked. When Paul and Eliza arrived at King Yanxiao's city, Eliza's uncle, Cardinal Roger, happened to have gone to an inspection of the church in a city and had yet to return. The archbishop and a few bishops accompanied him, leaving only the Knight of Light, Roman, to stay in the Hall of Light. As the duel was near and it was hosted by Rex the Great himself, Paul did not dare to be negligent. He only rested for a night in the church of Yanxiao's capital, and immediately set off the next morning for the neighboring Long Huang Empire. With Paul's identity, the two successfully passed through the border fortress of the Long Huang Empire and rushed all the way to the nearest Dragon Fang city. The rich power of faith in the Brilliance Palace of Yanxiao's capital made Chenrui's heart itch. That night, he sneaked into the prayer hall and ate his fill. This time, the strategy of his main body going to the Island of Storms and his avatar staying in Garden City as a substitute successfully gave Chinrei a flash of inspiration. A bold plan began to take shape in his mind. Due to the fusion of memories, after entering the Long Huang Empire, Chinrei's heart began to grow an indescribable emotion. It seemed to be homesickness. "Sir, I'm just thinking that Samuel was clearly defeated by Sir last time, but this time he took the initiative to provoke a public duel. I'm afraid it's not that simple." Chinrei deliberately revealed a pondering look. "It's very likely that his strength has already broken through, or mastered some kind of secret technique. We can't underestimate him," Paul replied indifferently. "Don't worry, I have absolute confidence." "Sir, don't blame me for being talkative." Chinrei frowned. "My teacher once said that strategically you should look down on the enemy, and tactically you should pay attention to the enemy. Even if Sir's strength is above Samuel's, you must not lose your caution and be extremely careful. I know your loyalty. There are some things that I can't say, so I can only tell you. Don't worry needlessly." Paul was well aware of Eliza's terrifying means. The Island of Storms was an extremely terrifying place. Since Eliza was certain that Samuel and Joanna would not return alive, then even if Samuel's strength was much stronger than before, he would still die. The only pity was Joanna, but that woman's heart wasn't with him. In the future, as long as he grasped power and authority, even if Joanna died, there would be more and better women. But no buts. I will definitely win this battle. Paul naturally did not know that his follower's intention was to numb him. He smiled faintly and said, "We've already passed through Sueluo Fortress and Dragon Fang City is just ahead. In order to reach the imperial capital of Yerodisha as soon as possible, I've already asked my family to arrange for 2 griffins in advance. Do you have any experience riding a griffin? You should know that even a tamed griffin is not something an ordinary flying magical beast can compare to. I have a lot of experience in the air, but it's my first time riding a griffin. However, you should have confidence in my beast-taming skills. I'm an expert in this area." Of course, Chinrei would not say that a griffin was nothing. He was a dragon knight, and in a dual sense. If he were to delve into it, it would involve a difficult problem related to posture, and it was the same for a knight riding a dragon. When the griffin saw the little thunderbird on Chinrei's shoulder, it revealed a faint sense of uneasiness and hostility. Both were experts in the air, and the thunderbird's rank was higher than the griffin. Although the thunderbird was only a young one, it was enough to arouse the griffin's vigilance. Chinrei's beast-taming skills immediately came into play, successfully resolving the abnormality of the griffin, and he rode the griffin into the air. The griffin's flying speed was not inferior to the wyvern's, but its endurance was slightly inferior. However, Paul's Norman family was quite powerful. They had arranged for replacement mounts along the way, allowing the 2 to fly at the highest speed. 5 days later, the 2 finally arrived at the capital city of the Long Huang Empire, Yerodisha. At this time, there were still 3 days before the duel. Yerodisha meant sparkling treasure in the dragon language. As everyone knew, as one of the 2 major empires in the human world, the Long Huang Empire had an extremely close relationship with dragons. They had the only dragon knight legion in the human world. This was a real dragon. The wyvern dragon knight in the demon realm could only be regarded as a knockoff compared to it. Yerodisha was one of the most famous cities in the human world. Not only was it the political and military center of the Dragon Soul Empire, but it was also the largest commercial center. It was magnificent and incomparably prosperous. The avenue was wide enough for 10 large carriages to run side by side. Both sides were crisscrossed with alleys, buildings, and pedestrians were bustling. Shops were no longer limited to a certain area but could be seen everywhere. Along the way, they could also hear the music of bards coming from small squares or near landmark buildings. The 3 imperial capitals of the demon realm combined couldn't compare to the prosperity of this Dragon Soul Empire. Even though Chinrei had lived 2 lives, he was still dazzled by it. Paul was the eldest son and first heir of the Roman family. His father, Salvador Roman, was the deputy director of the Long Huang Empire's Academic Affairs Department. Unlike the House of Representatives owned by the Rio Empire, the monarch of the Long Huang Empire was more exclusive, and the rule was more thorough. Under the emperor were 2 chambers and 3 departments, namely, the Administration Council, the Military Council, the Legal Department, the Financial Department, and the Academic Affairs Department. The Administration Council dealt with state affairs, the Military Council dealt with the empire's military affairs, the Legal Department was the agency that executed and maintained the empire's laws, the Financial Department was in charge of economic projects such as commerce and agriculture, and the Academic Affairs Department was in charge of the college and education. The empire's power structure was clearly divided, and many places were indeed worthy of learning from the Demon Realm Empire. In terms of strength and heritage, the Roman family was originally a small family in the empire. Relying on the efforts of recent generations, their power gradually increased, and they gradually entered the upper echelons of the empire. After Paul became the disciple of humanity's most famous sword saint, Holy Knight Captain Pari of the Holy Mountain of Light, his influence further expanded. Recently, he set an engagement with the Philip family, and many butterfly effects came one after another. Due to his age, the former director of the Academic Affairs Department, Old Leon, submitted his resignation to Rex the Great several times. It was said that he finally received the approval of Rex the Great not long ago. The new director of the Academic Affairs Department would be chosen from the 3 deputy directors, and the most popular one was Paul's father, Salvador. It was said that when Salvador accompanied Rex the Great to inspect Star Dragon Academy last week, Rex the Great had personally revealed this intention. Although the official appointment letter had not been issued, many people in the Academic Affairs Department had already begun to curry favor with this future deputy director. Chenrui followed Paul to the Roman family's mansion, and just happened to see Salvador personally send a few people out of the door. When these people saw Paul, they all smiled, and some even bowed to him. Paul recognized that the leader was the patriarch of the Lincoln family. The Lincoln family was once an old rival of the Roman family. In recent years, with the growth of the Roman family's power, the Lincoln family began to change their strategy and befriend the Roman family. Now that Paul's participation in the Temple Knight selection was imminent, and the wedding date was approaching, the patriarch of the Lincoln family had personally sent his second son, Diego, to the Roman family. He wanted to become Paul's follower, which symbolized that the Lincoln family had completely handed over the white flag to the Roman family. Naturally, Salvador would not refuse, and had already agreed on behalf of his son. Paul thought about it, and did not express any objections. Although the appearance of this competitor was a bit unexpected, Chenrui did not take it to heart. His animal taming and mind language were deeply valued by Eliza, and his loyalty to Paul had also been tested. Taking a step back, after the duel, it was still a question whether this follower would stay with Paul. Seeing Chenrui's calm look, Paul nodded approvingly. As a strong man, he would definitely have more than one follower in the future. However, there were also good and bad among followers. Compared with Diego, who had an impetuous look on his face, the ability and loyalty of Richard were obviously more trustworthy. There seemed to be no movement from the Philip family and the Tribbitt family, and there was no news from Samuel or Joanna. Paul was even more certain in his heart. In the following days, he would either frequently attend various social events or take Chenrui and Diego around the capital to show off, allowing Chenrui to see the prosperity of Eruditia. 3 days later, the date of the duel finally arrived. The location of the duel was the largest royal arena in the capital. Paul's reputation as the #1 genius swordsman was very resounding in Eruditia. This time, the Dragon-Bright Emperor, Rex, personally hosted the duel. The upper-class nobles gathered together, plus the civilians watching the excitement. The huge arena was packed. Paul's appearance was very good. Today, he wore a dazzling sapphire armor with a silver silk cloak. His whole person looked dazzling and attracted many people's attention. When he walked into the field, it attracted the screams of the noble ladies and women. Gossip related to the duel also circulated in the crowd, such as the triangle relationship between Joanna, Samuel, and Paul, Samuel's defeat in the duel and the loss of his fiancée, etc. The duel had not yet begun, but the whole scene was already quite heated. Chinray was Paul's group of friends and relatives. His position happened to be opposite the VIP seats. Although the distance was relatively far, with his eyesight, he could clearly see the situation on the opposite VIP seats. In the middle of the VIP seats sat one of the two human emperors, Rex. Roland. Rex wore a pale golden robe, a crown on his head, and a scepter in his hand. He looked 35 or 36 years old. He was handsome and had a mustache. He was full of the charm of a mature man. Arthur's outline could be faintly seen on his facial features. As his eyebrows flickered, there was a supreme deterrent. When he saw Rex's face clearly, Chinray's heartbeat suddenly accelerated a lot. There was a strange sense of intimacy in his heart. It originated from the fusion memory. In the memory, this emperor seemed to be a doting father. At least, he used to be. There was a young man next to Rex. He had silver hair and golden eyes. His expression was casual. Judging from the position of sitting side by side with the emperor, this person's status should be very special. This young man faintly gave Chinray a sense of danger. It was just like when he saw Raisin in the Bloody Empire that day. At that time, Chinray was only at the level of Demon Emperor. Chinray didn't know if the young man noticed the peeping and looked this way. Chinray immediately retracted his gaze and shouted with Diego next to him to cheer for Paul. The young man looked for a while, and he didn't find anything unusual, so he turned his head again. Chinray was secretly vigilant. Just in case, he didn't dare to look at the young man again. However, a special feeling in his heart became stronger, as if something was attracting him. His gaze moved to the side involuntarily, and finally fell on a person on the lower left side of Rex. This was a woman with short, golden brown hair and blue eyes that were deep and beautiful. She was sitting next to a man. Unlike the other aristocratic women's revealing and sexy clothes, she was wrapped in a tight robe and a veil on her face. The moment he saw this woman, Chinray felt his heart beating at an unprecedented frequency. With his will and strength at the moment, he couldn't suppress it. This was the throbbing belonging to Arthur. For the first time, it was so strong. Chapter 662. In Chinray's mind, some memory fragments began to intertwine and emerge. Most of these fragments were incomplete and hazy, but they all had one common feature: eyes. The blue eyes were as beautiful as the ocean, and there was a touch of sadness in the gentleness in the depth. In a trance, all the fragments began to overlap and converged into a vague scene. A warm hand gently stroked the young man's face, and he slowly turned and left. The distant figure became more and more blurred in the young man's tears. This was the most profound picture left in Arthur's subconscious, or obsession. Even Chinray's main consciousness, which had merged with the memory fragments, couldn't erase this strong obsession. Chinray took a deep breath and finally suppressed the strong emotional fluctuations. He frowned and asked Diego next to him, "Who is the woman sitting in the second row on the left of His Majesty?" "The second row on the left?" Diego squinted his eyes for a long time, but he couldn't see clearly at all. He refused to show weakness and deliberately said, "It turns out to be her." "Don't be delusional. A woman who can sit in that position is not someone a small character like you can covet." Chinray thought, "I covet your sister. If I really reveal the identity of the Royal Highness, I'm afraid your sister will covet me." Without waiting for him to ask again, Paul in the field spoke. Paul first bowed to Rex the Great in the VIP seats, then exhaled and said, "Dear His Majesty Rex, Your Royal Highnesses, Lords and guests." Paul's powerful voice covered the entire arena, and the noisy arena gradually quieted down. "I'm very sorry to have kept you waiting for a long time. Everyone must be wondering why my opponent, Samuel Caint, hasn't appeared yet." Paul's words caused a burst of whispers. They were obviously guessing the reason. According to the time, the challenger, Samuel, should have appeared, but he was nowhere to be seen until now. The patriarch of the Kane family, Samuel's father, deputy director of the Empire's finance department, Carlo Kane, had begun to sweat. Samuel was the Silver Knight of the Empire, and the duel was personally presided over by Rex the Great. Cowardice and defeat were two completely different concepts. If Samuel still didn't appear, it would no longer be a matter of the outcome of the duel. The Kane family might not be able to bear the wrath of Rex the Great. Here, I want to announce to everyone a piece of news that I just got today. The channel of this news is very reliable, but because the content of the news is too shocking, I've been unsure. However, Samuel hasn't appeared until now, which is enough to prove the authenticity of this news. Paul glanced at Carlo, who was constantly wiping his sweat, then he set his eyes on the patriarch of the Philip family and Joanna's father, Fred. He sneered. The news is that Samuel knows that he is not my opponent, so he just used the duel as a guise to elope with my fiancée, Joanna, early in the morning. This was indeed explosive news. There was a sudden uproar in the arena stands, and there were more and more discussions. Many people knew that Samuel and Joanna were lovers, and they also knew that after Samuel was defeated in the duel last time, Joanna's father set a wedding date with the Roman family despite his daughter's opposition. Unexpectedly, this time Samuel was so bold that he ignored the duel personally presided over by Rex the Great and eloped with Joanna. The patriarch of the Philip family, Fred, was shocked. He looked at Paul with shock and anger. Joanna had gone to Garden City to relax and had not returned yet. Taking a step back, it was not impossible for her to elope with Samuel. But Fred did not expect that Paul, who had always been respectful to him, did not inform him in advance, but directly exposed this matter in front of His Majesty Rex and everyone else. This was tantamount to slapping the Philip family in the face. Not only that, this scandal was tantamount to directly damaging the face of the arbitrator, Rex the Great, and would bring extremely serious consequences to both the Philip family and the Tribbitt family. If he had not been persuaded by Eliza, Paul would certainly not have bitten the Philip family. Now that he had chosen his future path, he must prove his determination to the Church and the Saintess. If he could attack and suppress the two families at the same time this time, it would definitely be beneficial to the Roman family's ascension. As long as they formed a certain momentum, coupled with the secret support of the Church, even Rex the Great would have to be somewhat afraid. Many people in the VIP seats were also whispering. Rex the Great still looked expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, the surrounding voices suddenly quieted down. Paul seemed to feel something and was slightly shocked. A look of disbelief flashed in his eyes, and he slowly turned his head. He saw two people appear in the field, a man and a woman. It was Samuel and Joanna. Paul could not believe his eyes. Weren't Samuel and Joanna supposed to die on Storm Island? Could this be Eliza's trick? That was even more impossible. It was not easy for Eliza to win him over. She had no motive to frame him at all. First of all, I want to apologize to His Majesty. Due to some special reasons, I came late. Samuel bowed to the VIP seats. The reason why I was delayed was that I went to a dangerous place and risked my life to save my most beloved woman. That place is called Storm Island. As soon as this sentence came out, the audience was in an uproar again. Storm Island. That was a dangerous place that even a saint-level expert did not dare to enter. Samuel actually did this for Joanna. Oh, right, why was Joanna on Storm Island? What a joke! You think you can save people from Storm Island? Paul had quickly recovered from the shock. His mind was racing. It was you who seduced my fiancée. The two of you colluded to make up such a ridiculous lie. Joanna is no longer your fiancée. No matter the outcome of this duel, the engagement between the Philip family and the Lohman family will be annulled. The one who spoke was Fred, the patriarch of the Philip family. The power of the Philip family was above that of the Lohman family. He had forced his daughter to marry Paul because of the disfavor of the Tribbitt family, Paul's potential, and the background of the Church. Now that Paul had slapped the Philip family in the face in front of everyone, and almost caused the Philip family to be destroyed, he was naturally not stupid enough to give the other side of his face to be slapped. This decision was expected by many, including Paul himself. However, when he heard Fred announce it in front of everyone, Paul's heart still clenched and gave birth to a strong resentment. The happiest ones were Joanna and Samuel. At this moment, Rex the Great's deep voice sounded from the VIP seats, and the surroundings suddenly became quiet. Since both parties have arrived, let the duel begin. Samuel nodded to Joanna. She was very clever and did not say a word. She just gave him a moving smile and turned to walk to the grandstand. Paul's face was already covered with haze, and his eyes were full of hostility. Joanna had always been cold to him and had never smiled at him like that. The fact that this adulterous couple could come back alive from Storm Island and appear in the arena in time was indeed a heavy blow to him. Since things had already come to this point, the only thing he could do now was to defeat Samuel in the duel. As the victor, he would insist that Samuel and Joanna had an affair and work together to frame him. Then he would rush to the Holy Mountain to become a Templar Knight, and use the power of the Holy Mountain to protect the Roman family. Although many of his previous plans were forced to be aborted, it was the only way to salvage the situation and turn the tables. Paul let out a low roar. His whole body was filled with murderous intent. He held a long sword tightly with both of his hands. This was a double-edged sword named Splendor. It was a gift from Paul's teacher, the paladin Captain Pari. A double-edged sword was also known as a double-edged great sword. The width and length of the blade was far longer than the average single-edged sword. There was a sheath clamping tenon between the blade and the hilt. Not only could it be used to connect the two, but it could also be used to increase the power of the sword. The edge of the sword was slightly raised, and there was a sharp blade at the end, like the fangs of a beast. Samuel slowly pulled out his long sword. Compared to Splendor, this excellent tier sword was just an ordinary one. The aura of the Silver Tier Knight did not have any special flow. Compared to Paul's aggressive aura, the Silver Tier Knight seemed to be calm. Rex the Great's gaze stopped on Samuel for a moment. His eyes lit up a little, and then he became calm again. The young man beside him suddenly yawned, as if he had already foreseen the outcome of the duel. He was not interested in watching anymore. His actions seemed a little rude in front of Rex the Great. However, Rex did not seem to mind it at all. The rest of the people also acted as if they did not see it. Paul's figure flashed, and he quickly approached Samuel. His double-edged sword swept across with a terrifying sound of wind. As long as there was space, the power of a double-edged sword was quite terrifying. The sturdy ground that was protected by the barrier had already begun to crack under the pressure of the blade. Samuel did not take the attack head-on. Instead, he focused on dodging. He adopted a strategy of guerrilla warfare. It seemed that he wanted to exhaust Paul's energy. Paul was unmoved. Instead, his attacks became even more ferocious. In fact, Paul did not show his true strength during the duel with Samuel last time. This time, Samuel's strength had obviously increased to a higher level. He had entered the Saint tier, pseudo-Saint tier, and was on par with him. However, Paul knew that Samuel's weakness was his lack of endurance. Endurance happened to be Paul's strength. Samuel was barely able to defend and dodge such a high-pressure attack. It would consume even more energy, and he would definitely be exhausted when the time came. Suddenly, Samuel's long sword drew an unimaginable arc. The back of the sword pressed against the spine of the double-edged sword at lightning speed. The blade of the sword moved along the body of the sword, aiming for Paul's throat. Such speed and strength were far beyond imagination. Paul was taken aback. He hurriedly tilted his head, and he felt a chill on his face. The blade had scratched his face, and there was an extra blood mark. Samuel did not give the opponent any more chances. The long sword in his hand was like a cunning viper. It bypassed the edge of the double-edged sword and frequently locked Paul's vital points. In the dim sword light, several cracks appeared on the sapphire armor on Paul's body. There was blood dripping on the ground. It was Paul's blood. Chunrei nodded secretly. Since receiving guidance, Samuel's combat skills and power utilization have indeed made great progress. In fact, the strength gap between the two sides was not very big. Paul's strength was only a step away from the intermediate stage of the Demon Emperor, and Samuel had just advanced to the intermediate stage of the Demon Emperor. However, the timing, location, and manpower were all on Samuel now. There was no suspense in this battle. Now, he could plan the next step with peace of mind. Chapter 663. Flawless! The gemstones on Paul's two-handed sword shone brightly. He stabbed the sword into the ground, and his body was immediately surrounded by flames. The flames instantly turned into countless crisscrossing translucent light shields. This move was taught to him by his teacher Pari. It was equivalent to an absolute defense of the compressed power of the domain, and its effect was far above that of ordinary defensive spells. Paul himself didn't expect that he would be completely suppressed by his defeated opponent in this duel, and that he would be forced to use this move so soon. Samuel's continuous attacks couldn't break through the domain of flawless. He jumped and put some distance between him and Paul. A huge light mark appeared under his feet. The mark carried a strong aura of destruction, and he pointed his long sword at Paul. Dawn extinction? Paul secretly sneered. Samuel had also used this move in the duel last time, and he had easily broken it. He knew very well the characteristics of this move. This move also contained the power of the domain, and the attack range was very large. The disadvantage was that it consumed a lot of energy, and the attack range was relatively scattered, which happened to be restrained by the defensive characteristics of flawless. Now, although Samuel had shown that he was more powerful than him, as long as he could defend against this big move and counterattack when Samuel was exhausted, he could turn the situation around, or even turn the tables. In an intense battle, opportunities were fleeting, and the time to judge or think was very short. Often, one could only make a choice, and it was more of an instinctive reaction. Samuel's sword had already exploded with an extremely sharp aura. Paul instantly made a decision. He didn't dodge, but fully activated the power of the domain, and used flawless to take it head-on. The light in the field shone brightly, and the nearby protective barriers shook violently. The special high-strength defensive stone slabs couldn't withstand the huge pressure, and shattered. Paul felt the strong impact of flawless, and the transparent light shields began to thin, even slightly distorted. However, he wasn't surprised, but happy. Flawless was a bit like a spring. The thinner the shield, the stronger the defense. Dawn extinction was indeed powerful, but with the strength of flawless, it could definitely last until the end. Right at this moment, Paul suddenly felt the flow of his domain power change. With a chi sound, he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. Something sharp had already pierced through his armor, and the pain was so intense that it pierced his heart and spleen. Then, sharp objects continuously broke through the shield at high speed. Paul felt as if he had been shot repeatedly. His whole body shook violently, and holes appeared on the surface of the flawless shield. Although the holes gradually healed automatically, they were still unable to withstand the sharp impact. After the burst of light, Paul had already become a bloody man. The transparent shield had completely collapsed, and he staggered back. He had just stabilized his footing, and before he had time to react, he suddenly stopped breathing. A sharp blade had already been placed on his throat. A broken blade. At this moment, Paul finally came to a realization. It turned out that dawn extinction was completely different from before. The scattered attacks were condensed together, and its power was doubled. What was even more impossible to guard against was that Samuel deliberately shattered the long saber, and mixed it with dawn extinction, and shot it out. The broken blade, which contained the power of the domain, was extremely sharp and extremely lethal. Even flawless could not withstand it. That saber must have been tampered with accordingly. No wonder he had not fought head-on with the brilliant's great sword before. All of this was prepared. Paul's second reaction was shock. He had already lost to Samuel in front of Joanna, in front of Rex the Great, and all the upper-class nobles, and in front of all the spectators. Previously, the movements of the two were extremely fast, and many of the spectators could not see it clearly. When the scene froze, the stands all quieted down. The result of the duel was shocking. Paul, the number one genius that most people had thought highly of before the duel, had actually lost. Judging from the scene of him bathed in blood, it was still a crushing defeat. Samuel glanced at Paul indifferently. He did not say anything like a victor's declaration of victory. He just slowly put away the broken blade and turned around. Disregard, this was blatant disregard. Paul's heart surged with a strong sense of shame and indignation. He had the urge to sneak up on Samuel and cut him in half. However, this thought was fleeting. This was not the wilderness, but the royal arena. That arbitrator Rex the Great was one of the strongest saint-level beings in the human world. If he really dared to act rashly, it was unknown whether Samuel would die or not, but Paul and the Norman family would definitely be doomed. Samuel is the winner of this duel. Rex the Great's voice rang out. It was still calm and composed. Samuel bowed deeply to Rex the Great. At this time, a smiling man sitting below Rex the Great stood up and said, "Father once said that in order to achieve true success, hard work is more important than talent. I can imagine how much hard work our Silverter Knight has put in to achieve today's stunning victory. Sir Samuel, I'm very interested in the heroic deeds of Storm Island this time. I wonder if you can satisfy my curiosity? Perhaps you can also take out some spoils of war to let me broaden my horizons." This man's words were beautiful, but in fact, he was questioning the events of Storm Island. He was obviously up to no good when Samuel had just won. Only then did Chinray know that this man was his second brother, Garfield. Arthur's Jinyao territory was currently ruled by Garfield's proxy. Garfield and Samuel's father, Carlo, had a long-standing grudge. They had framed and suppressed each other many times. The efforts of the second prince were inseparable from the current predicament of the Cavigot family. In the face of Garfield's attack, Samuel looked very calm. He bowed. "Your Highness Garfield, I'm sorry. I went to Storm Island just to save my lover who was framed by a poisonous scheme. I'm not a hero. Moreover, if it weren't for a lucky escape, Joanna and I would have died in the hands of the Titans." Titans? The surrounding voices of discussion began to increase again. It was said that Titans could contend with giant dragons. Who would have thought that Samuel would actually encounter such a terrifying giant creature? As he said, Samuel took out a palm-sized piece of silver metal. "This is just something I picked up when I was running for my life. It's not a spoil of war. I wanted to keep it by my side to always be vigilant, and give myself a higher goal to strive for. I don't know if it can satisfy your Highness." The young man next to Rex the Great looked at the piece of metal from afar, and his silver eyes glowed. "The armor piece of the silver-tempered scale armor is indeed Titan's craftsmanship. This little guy is very good." The young man's voice was not loud, but after Garfield heard it, he actually didn't dare to question it anymore and sat down. Rex the Great nodded slightly. "Samuel, I recognize your courage and strength. I now confer you as a Gold Knight of the Empire. The official conferment ceremony will be held in 3 days. Rex the Great paused, glanced at the young man on the side, and added, "I will also specially grant you the qualification to participate in the Dragon Valley Assembly in the second half of the year. If you can be recognized by the dragons, you will officially become a member of the Dragon Rider Legion." Samuel was overjoyed and quickly knelt on one knee to thank him. The conferment of Rex the Great caused a sensation in the entire royal arena. It was not too surprising that Samuel became a Gold Knight. After his strength reached the corresponding level, he was qualified to become a Gold Knight. Paul was a Gold Knight candidate, but he just skipped the level of a Gold Knight. Based on Samuel's performance in defeating Paul today, this kind of skipping was understandable. The most important thing was the qualification for the Dragon Valley Assembly. This kind of assembly was actually the strongest and highest status of the Empire's Dragon Knight selection competition. It was held every 50 years. There were only 10 places each time. The competition was extremely fierce. Even a gold knight would find it difficult to get this qualification. He didn't expect that Rex the Great would directly bestow one of the places to Samuel today. Many upper-class nobles began to speculate whether this was a sign of the re-emergence of the Kavaagd family. The patriarch of the Kavaagd family, Carlo, showed an excited expression and bowed deeply to Rex the Great from afar. After Joanna's father, Fred, publicly announced that the marriage between Joanna and Paul was invalid, he was hesitating whether to accept Samuel, who had been rejected by him. After hearing this reward, he immediately made up his mind. The second prince, Garfield, still kept a smile on his face, but there was no trace of a smile in his stiff smile. Paul, who stood in the field, was more like an outsider at this time. The glory and reward received by Samuel was equivalent to another slap in his face. He was the first genius swordsman of the empire, and the disciple of Paladin head Pari. He was high-spirited and arrogant. He had always been shrouded in the aura of genius and winner. When had he ever suffered such a painful failure? It was not until Chunrui walked into the field and held him that Paul regained consciousness. He felt as if his body had lost its strength, and he could only rely on support to stagger down. The news that Samuel defeated the first genius Paul, and was conferred as a gold knight spread throughout Yerodisha in a blink of an eye. It seemed to be a chain reaction. The result of the duel triggered the next series of events. The resignation of the old director of the Imperial Department of Academic Affairs, Leon, was approved by Rex the Great. His successor was the former director of the Department of Finance, Lucia. The deputy director of the Department of Academic Affairs, Salvador Norman, was transferred to the Department of Military Affairs. Karajan, the patriarch of the Kribit family, became the director of the Department of Finance. Many discerning people could see that this series of personnel changes was more like a long premeditated reshuffle, and the so-called duel was just the fuse. In recent years, the family forces related to the church had expanded more and more fiercely, which had long aroused the vigilance of Rex the Great. In any case, the supreme ruler of an empire was ultimately the emperor. The patriarch of the Norman family, Salvador, was originally the most popular candidate for the director of the Department of Academic Affairs, and even Rex the Great had verbally revealed the relevant intentions, but now he was transferred to the Department of Military Affairs. The position of the two academies was higher than that of the three departments. This kind of transfer seemed to be a promotion on the surface, but in fact, Salvador was only a nominal title in the Department of Military Affairs. He could not compare to the director of the Department of Academic Affairs who had real power. The network of contacts and interests that had been worked hard for many years in the Department of Academic Affairs would gradually collapse. This incident had caused the Norman family to suffer a deeper blow than it seemed on the surface, and the family's business had been affected in all fields. The mansion that was originally crowded was now deserted, and no one came to visit. Even the follower of the Lincoln family, Diego, was nowhere to be seen. Only Chimrue, the loyal follower, still stayed and constantly encouraged the frustrated Paul. Looking at the sincere eyes of his follower, Paul was moved, and finally made up his mind to cheer up and go to White Cliff to participate in the selection of the paladins of the temple. Per Paul, he could not see the hidden horns and tails behind Richard's sincerity. Otherwise he would have been moved to the point of bleeding. Chapter 664. In the evening, in a private room of the tavern. Just an engagement? Chinray smiled and raised his glass. Compared with the major personnel changes in the capital, the news of Samuel and Joanna's engagement seemed insignificant. Of course, for the two parties involved, this was the most important. After going through all kinds of hardships, the two of them were finally able to be together. Samuel quickly stood up and drank his glass. My family has its rules. After the engagement, the wedding can only be officially held after at least 3 months. Sit down, I said, don't be so restrained. Chinray waved his hand to Samuel. I hate those long-winded rules the most. Samuel sat down and smiled. If your Highness returns to the palace now, then the marriage with Princess Rambus of the Rio Empire will definitely be restarted. Princess Rambus is known as the brightest pearl of the Ryo Empire. This marriage was envied by many people at the beginning. I can be sure that your highness will experience more rules in the marriage than I do now. Princess Rambus? The brightest pearl? Chunrui frowned and shook his head indifferently. What's a princess? I even have a queen, and there are 2 of them. Who is Rambus? This is for you. Chunrui took out a long sword with a sheath and handed it over. Samuel respectfully took the saber. When it touched his hand, just the touch of the dark red scabbard gave him an extraordinary feeling. Under Chunrui's signal, Samuel gently pulled out the sword. He suddenly felt a chill and couldn't help but shiver. The entire saber did not have any gorgeous accessories, nor did it have any dazzling light. When it was swung, it was silent, but the blade was extremely sharp. The light blue body of the saber had faint fish scale-like patterns, appearing simple and mysterious. The weight and length of this saber were extremely suitable for his hands. What surprised Samuel even more was the wonderful feeling of being one with life. It was as if it was a part of his body, and he could use his strength and moves at will. Just by waving it a few times, he had a feeling that he could not put it down. I will soon follow Paul to White Cliff, so I can't attend your engagement, or even your wedding. Chunrui shrugged. The quality of this flying centipede should be high in the legendary level. I made it myself. Consider it as an early gift for you. In addition to the increased attributes, it also has a feature that you should like. As long as you use a special method to activate the sigils on the sword can burst into fragments. As long as you use the corresponding power, the fragments can also be automatically retracted and reassembled. Flying Centipede sharpens, deepens wounds, increases waving speed by 50%, slowly recovers stamina by absorbing the enemy's power through damage. Special attribute: the sword has the characteristic of splitting and combining. It can be split into hundreds of fragments and retracted. The fragment state increases the splash damage by 30%. With Chunrui's current mechanical attainments, the probability of creating legendary level equipment was already quite high, but it wasn't so easy to create quasi-artifact. In addition to his personal state, he must also have the corresponding inspiration, just like the last time in the Iron Tree Spark House of the Hill Dwarf. However, for Samuel, the value of this sword was definitely not lower than the quasi-artifact. Samuel's eyes lit up. He stroked Flying Centipede as if he got a treasure. The attributes of this sword were too suitable for him, especially the characteristic of splitting and combining. It was simply tailor-made for the improved version of Dawn Extinction. By the way, it was indeed specially made by Royal Highness for me. Royal Highness must have spent a lot of effort to make it suitable for my new move. I can see that Royal Highness has spent a lot of effort. Wait. Legendary level upper grade? Personally made? Samuel suddenly remembered that the full set of eternal black potions he had taken was also made by this third Royal Highness. His heart couldn't help but beat violently. Peak Saint Power. Potion Master. Also, he is at least a top mechanic master. If Third Royal Highness returns to the palace now, with this strength, it is very likely that he will directly become the first heir to the throne. Why? Your Royal Highness. Samuel suppressed the shock in his heart. Please forgive me for asking. Chunrui shook his head, patted Samuel, and interrupted his question. Everyone has their own pursuit and obsession. Just like how you went to the demon realm for Joanna and the Island of Storms, I also have my own goal. I can't answer you too much now. I only have one request. No matter what happens, don't reveal my identity to anyone at any time without my permission. If you want to take this as an order, then this is my only order. Samuel didn't ask again. He just nodded solemnly. Okay, I should go too. I hope that when we meet next time, you are already a dragon knight. Chunrui stood up. By the way, that. And nothing. Take care. Chunrui wanted to ask who the veiled woman was, but he didn't ask in the end. The veiled woman and Arthur must have a deep bond. She even fused with a part of Arthur's consciousness to produce such a strong reaction. But so what? Arthur is Arthur, and he is him. This Long Huang Empire is Arthur's home, but not his. He was just a passerby who occasionally passed by. Even if he came here, he would eventually pass by. Just like what he often said to his beloved women, I'm Chunrei, Chunrei's Chin, Chunrei's Rei. At this moment, he suddenly missed them in the demon realm. Very much. Demon realm. Dark Moon Estate. The former sheriff and financial officer's residence. A pair of beautiful eyes were staring at the two purple moons in the sky, and the ruby-like pupils seemed to be covered with a thin layer of mist. Hey, Athena, why are you in a daze? Come and eat quickly, or Paglio and the others will snatch all the food. It was Oliphius who was slurring. She was stuffing a braised pork hoof in her mouth. In fact, judging from the large pile of food in front of the black dragon chick, the few dishes on Paglio and Lomont's side were just insignificant. Got it, Oliphius. Athena turned her head and smiled. Delia on the side was experienced. She understood Athena's thoughts and handed over a glass of wine. Do you miss him? Athena responded softly and took the wine. She was not a person who could hide her thoughts, especially in front of her good friends. Today was Delia's birthday, and a small party was held. Due to a series of large-scale activities such as Catherine's visit and follow-up cooperation, Jia and Princess Alice, as the Empress, were unable to leave the capital. Rala's training had reached a critical juncture, so she was unable to come. The rest of her friends had arrived. I'm sorry. Isabella, sitting across the table next to Crobolus, spoke. Chunrei had gone to the Dead Sea to look for the Dark Elemental King for several months, and there had been no news. This dangerous journey was for her. For these close friends, this matter was no longer a secret, including the relationship between Chunrei and Isabella. Only Lomont was a little embarrassed. After all, Isabella was his father's sister. Although this was not a big deal in the demon realm, even though he was the one who caused this incident. Facing Athena and Kia, Ms. Intelligence was actually a little guilty. It was completely different from facing Jia. Except for Rala, she usually avoided meeting them as much as possible. She just stayed in the Rainbow Valley to recuperate, and occasionally went to the capital to help Her Majesty Empress plan. On Delia's birthday this time, Isabella received an invitation from Lomont. Her close friend Crobolus also strongly urged her to go. Thinking that she might not have much time left, Mazzini simply let it go. Unexpectedly, perhaps out of sympathy, Isabella saw more friendliness and tolerance in Athena's eyes. It was not a deliberate act, but a genuine kindness. This made the Devil's Snare Flower, who had always been skillful, silent. She only spoke up at this moment. You don't have to apologize. Athena shook her head and smiled. If it were me or others, he would do the same. You should know him very well, so you should trust him even more. He will come back in time. Kia also nodded. In fact, the little succubus girl secretly whispered to Athena beforehand, proposing to join forces to give Isabella a show of strength. But when she really faced Isabella, the succubus maid suddenly remembered that she used to be tortured by soul shackles and waited for death every day. Her heart could no longer harden. It was not the first time that Isabella heard the last sentence. Her nose suddenly became a little sour. She turned her face away. Thank you. Actually, I also miss the boss very much. I miss him very much. The black Miss Long on the side interrupted with a resentful look. She wiped her oily mouth with her hand. The large pile of food in front of her had disappeared, and there were only a few bones left. The one who reacted the fastest was the little succubus. She immediately showed vigilance. When did this foodie little female dragon hook up with my man? The bias of this guess was quite problematic. It was obvious that the first responsibility was blamed on Oliphius instead of a certain playbill. Athena and Oliphius had been to the battlefield together, so she knew the black dragon chick much better than Kia. She smiled indifferently. Isabella had recovered and asked, You really want his salary, right? Is it almost time to pay the salary? Oliphius nodded. She counted her fingers seriously and said, The salary and all welfare benefits are converted to 52 black crystal coins, 10 purple crystal coins and 13 white crystal coins a day. According to the settlement of half a year, he should pay me 30,000 black crystal coins. Speaking of 30,000 black crystal coins, the pupils of the Black Miss Long turned into the shape of black crystal coins. She almost drooled. Wait a minute, even if it is 53 black crystal coins a day, it should be less than 10,000 in half a year. Kia was now the person in charge of the Dark Moon Princess retail store. She was quite sensitive to the number of money. She immediately discovered the mistake of the Black Miss Long. It should be 9,534 black crystal coins according to the calculation of half a year and 183 days. Isabella quickly calculated the result. Oliphius, how did you calculate the 30,000? The Black Miss Long said righteously. Didn't I round it up? 52 black crystal coins can be rounded up to 100. I reluctantly gave up the remaining fraction that is less than 4. Isabella. Everyone. Who taught you to round it up like this? And you also counted half a year as 300 days. Chrobulus interjected. Although the dragon inscription Jade Miss Long was very bad, she was not bad at mathematics, which was closely related to financial management. Seeing so many people pointing out the mistake, the black dragon chick said with grievance, I'm not very good at math. But if I count according to your way, I seem to have missed out on the odd numbers. It should be 9,534 black crystal coins, 53 purple crystal coins, and 79 white crystal coins. Isabella. Everyone. The Black Miss Long suddenly thought of something, and her eyes lit up. By the way, the boss also promised to pay me a special service fee for my personal bodyguard. That is extra. It should be a lot, personal. And special service? What is it? The little demon girl's ears perked up again. When it came to special service, the succubus was the best among the sisters, so she immediately had some kind of sudden association. This is a secret between me and the boss. You can't tell other people. Oliphius shook her head firmly. Mom once taught me that a dragon must be trustworthy. This time, everyone's attention was shifted over. Their gazes were different. Does that guy really have an affair with Oliphius? My nephew slammed the table and said bitterly and jealously. Animal! The little demon girl rolled her eyes and used her trump card. Oliphius, you tell me this secret, and I will give you 100 black crystal coins. Oliphius's eyes suddenly lit up, but she shook her head. Mom said that a dragon must be strong-willed. You can't easily waver in your position. Although somewhat unreliable, Oliphius was not a very scheming person. A dragon, it was hard not to have some kind of suspicion in these words. Athena's voice immediately sounded. 1,000 black crystal coins. Athena, you are such a good person. The Black Miss Long was moved to tears, and she finally stabilized her position. But Mom also taught me 10,000 black crystal coins. This time it was Isabella. In an instant, the three women seemed to have formed a tacit alliance. Mom still. Wait a minute, 10,000 black crystal coins? It's not white crystal coins or purple crystal coins. Oliphius held Isabella's hand with stars in her eyes. Mom! Sister, you really give it to me? Hearing the term, mother, Isabella didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She broke free from the black dragon girl's greasy hand and said, If you really think of me as your sister, you must tell me the whole secret. And the Black Miss Long immediately said, The boss said that the special service is that if someone blocks the way, I will help him beat them up. If there is magic fire thunder on the ground, I will step on it first. If there is a puddle, I will jump in to fill it. These words were greatly beyond everyone's expectations. Although these unequal treaties were suspected of exploiting labor and abusing child labor, there was no content as imagined. The two guys who were waiting to watch a good show were greatly disappointed. That's it? Isabella asked worriedly. Of course not, I have a good memory, Oliphius said proudly. The boss also said that if I stay by sister's side, if a man dares to approach sister, I will beat that person into a pig's head. If sister's yard door is locked, I will help the boss secretly open it from the inside. If the boss climbs over the wall to come in, I will pretend not to see it. If the boss wants to have sex with sister, I will help him guard the door. Well, what is sex? Can it be eaten? Isabella. Everyone. The sister that the black dragon girl mentioned was no one but Isabella. For a while, several eyes turned around. Ms. Intelligence didn't expect that she actually spent 10,000 black crystal coins to make a mistake, and her face was rarely red. Master Poison Dragon and his nephew on the side looked at each other, and they said indignantly, "Beast!" Chapter 665. 3 days later, Chinray and Paul left the Dragon Brilliance Empire's capital, Yerodisha. It was different from the high profile they had when they first arrived. This time, it could be said to be light and simple. The two set off at night. However, Yerodisha's nightlife was very rich. Along the way, many people saw Paul and inevitably talked about him. Even though the voices were low and their horses were fast, Paul's hearing was sharp enough to hear everything. His face turned gloomy, and he tightened his grip on the reins. The two of them passed through the checks in the inner and outer city. After leaving the city, Paul whipped his mount as if he wanted to vent the anger in his heart. It was only when they reached the suburbs that he gradually slowed down. "Sir Paul!" Chinray showed a strenuous expression and urged his horse to catch up. Paul's breathing was a little heavy, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. "Richard, am I a failure? Life can't be smooth sailing. For losers, all kinds of setbacks and difficulties will become a part of our lives. However, as long as we don't give up hope, we can overcome any setbacks. A true winner will stand up from countless setbacks and failures." "That's right. Being able to stand up is at least half the battle. If we fall, we will never succeed." Chinray urged his horse to ride alongside Paul and smiled. "At least half the battle is already won, sir." Paul adjusted his breathing, feeling his fighting spirit burning again. He nodded. "A friend in need is a friend indeed. I am very fortunate to have a follower like you, a true friend who is also a mentor. I regret not listening to your advice. Don't worry this time, I will really stand up and become a paladin. When that time comes, we will return to Yerodisha with dignity. And I will help you fulfill your wish." "I am very relieved," Chinray said with a double meaning. "I believe sir will not let me down." Paul didn't know the true meaning of this sentence, so he continued to gallop forward. This time, he had returned to his normal speed. Chinray looked back at the brightly lit, glittering treasure behind him and suppressed the inexplicable sadness in his heart. "I should not come back after leaving this time." Whether it was home, father, or the pair of blue eyes, they were all just passers-by. He was Chinray, and he did not belong here. "Go!" Chinray turned around, shook the reins, and followed Paul's figure. This time, the two of them retraced their steps and headed for Dragon Fang City. Because in the Palace of Light of Dragon Tooth City, there was a single portal that led directly to White Cliff. Teleportation portals and teleportation arrays were similar in that they both used the principles of water magic. Furthermore, the number of teleportation was affected by mana and energy, so there was a corresponding limit. This single portal could only be entered and not exited. Furthermore, it was not open to the public and could only be used with special permission. Although Dragon Fang City was only a border city of the Longhuang Empire, its scale was far larger than Garden City, and even larger than Yanxiao Kingdom. The power of faith was extremely rich. In fact, there was no Palace of Light in Yerodisha, the capital of the Longhuang Empire. Chinray had already guessed it from Rex the Great's action of shuffling the cards during the duel. The divine mandate of monarchs was a common method used by human monarchs to deify autocratic systems. It promoted that the monarch's power was bestowed by God and was naturally reasonable. Any disobedience, or even rebellion, was blasphemy to God. However, with the Palace of Light, a special institution that represented the highest divine authority, the seemingly harmonious monarchs and divine authority always had an irresolvable contradiction. This contradiction was particularly prominent in the two holy empires. Whether it was the Dragon Bright Emperor or the Blue Glory Emperor, on the one hand, they needed the name of God to consolidate their rule and strengthen their power. On the other hand, water could carry a boat, but it could also capsize a boat. At the same time, the monarchs were deeply afraid of the divine authority that could override the monarchs. They even saw it as the greatest threat, and used various means to suppress it, either openly or secretly. The history of the human world was opened chapter by chapter in the development of this contradiction. The specific time when the Palace of Light appeared could no longer be determined, but it was worth noting that for countless years, regardless of the rise and fall of empires or kingdoms, the Palace of Light had always stood tall. The priest of the Palace of Light of Dragontooth City, Adola, was an acquaintance of Paul. Upon learning of his arrival, he personally went to the gate to welcome him. "Sir Adola." Paul looked at the Palace of Light, which was 10 times more heavily guarded than before. "It's already night time, but they're still in a state of vigilance. Did something big happen?" Adola nodded and glanced at Chinrue. Paul smiled slightly. "Sir Adola, let me introduce you. This is my most loyal follower and also my most trusted friend, Richard. He's a Knight of Light candidate, and he'll be following me to White Cliff to participate in the selection of Knights of the Temple. There's no need to hide anything, just say it." Chenrue's eyes revealed a touched look, but in his heart, he was very disdainful of Paul's method of buying people's hearts. How could a ruthless character who was willing to kill the woman he loved for benefits really trust anyone other than himself? Richard's wealth and status were quite valuable to Paul's future plans, and he had shown rare loyalty at the moment, so Paul now had to seize this talent. Once Richard's value was exhausted, or there were higher benefits as a price, Paul would definitely abandon him without hesitation. Adola could not help but look at Chinrue again, nodded, and said in a low voice, "The Black Death Apostles have appeared, and this time they're so brazen that it's outrageous. Their hands have already reached the capital of the Yanshao Kingdom. Appearing at this sensitive period of the selection of Knights of the Temple, there must be a great conspiracy. Currently, White Cliff has activated emergency response measures. Not only have a large number of Knights of Light been dispatched, but Chief Judge Seuss has also personally led the referees to the capital of Yanshao to investigate and eliminate the Black Death Apostles. The palaces of the nearby kingdoms or empires are all in a state of full alert. The distance between Dragontooth City and the Yanshao Kingdom is not too far, so we're also fully prepared here." Black Death Apostles? This unfamiliar name stunned Chinrue. Judging from Adola's expression and words, the Black Death Apostles should be a force opposing the Church of Light. Moreover, their whereabouts were secretive and not known by ordinary people, and they were regarded as a great enemy by the Church. He did not expect the Church of Light, which covered almost all human faith in the surface world, to have such an opponent. The phenomenon of the weakening of faith was discovered in the capital of Yanshao Kingdom. The referees have already found out that the actual source should have started from Gudan Town, then Garden City, and then Yanshao Kingdom. Speaking of the Black Death Apostles, Adola stopped smiling and revealed a solemn expression. "By the way, weren't you and Miss Eliza assassinated in Garden City? Even Gudan Town's priest Mana died in the assassination. The Dagger Brotherhood and the Black Death Apostles must have a close relationship. Sir Seuss has already ordered the eradication of the Dagger Brotherhood. I believe it won't be long before the Dagger Brotherhood is uprooted. It's getting late now. Rest here for the night, I'll send you to the portal tomorrow morning." Paul nodded. "Thank you, Sir Adola." Chinrue and Paul were arranged to rest in the guest room, and Adola gave Paul a lot of gifts. Actually, this Lord Priest had heard the news of Paul's defeat in the capital at the first moment, but he did not mention it. Instead, he was very polite. If Paul could become a Temple Knight of the Holy Mountain this time, his rank would be higher than a city-level church leader like him. It was very likely that it would affect the personnel changes in the near future. Although Adola had his own background, no matter what, it was definitely not wrong to build a good relationship in advance. After Adola left, Chinray asked curiously, Sir Paul, what exactly is the Black Death Apostles? The Black Death Apostles are followers of a secret church. This church advocates darkness and destruction, and their followers are extremely fanatical. 20,000 years ago, they massacred the living beings of 10 cities and sacrificed them to the evil god. At that time, it shocked the entire human world. Although the Church of Light and various countries worked together to eliminate them, they were not completely eliminated. Instead, they moved to the shadows and acted in an even more secretive manner. They are one of the enemies that the Church of Light fears the most and must eliminate. However, this church has disappeared in recent years. I don't know why. Massacring a city and sacrificing it? Chinray had a faint sense of familiarity. He rolled his eyes and asked again. Since this secret church has disappeared, what signs can we determine the identity of these heretics? Is it dark magic? Back then, Pastor Manna and I were ambushed by assassins using dark magic in a forest along the way. It's not dark magic. Paul pondered for a moment, then said in a low voice, This is an internal secret of the church. I can tell you, but you must keep it a secret. The reason why the Black Death Apostles are the most feared enemies of the Church of Light is because they have the power to blaspheme faith. They can transform the faith of light into destructive and evil power. Chinray felt his heart beating a little faster. When he heard Adola talk about the route of the Black Death Apostles from Gudon Town to Garden City and then to Yangshao Kingdom, he felt that something was wrong. Now, he was finally sure the culprit was not some Black Death Apostles, but Shura. This was actually a plan that Chinray came up with at the last minute. As the Avatar and the main body had a wonderful connection, even if they were separated by a long distance, they could still transform faith crystals. When Chinray left Yangshao Kingdom with Paul, he left Shura, his avatar, behind. His target was the power of faith in the Palace of Light in the kingdom. He only took it back a few days ago after having a full meal. He did not expect the Church of Light to find out so quickly. Fortunately, Shura did not follow Chinray all the time. Instead, they split up at Yangshao Kingdom. Otherwise, if the route of stealing faith was exactly the same as Richard's actions, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. What was even more fortunate was that there was an existence like the Black Death Apostles in the human world, who took the blame for Shura and Richard. Now that the unusual power of faith had been found out by the Church of Light, the investigation was very tight. Moreover, Chinray was about to go to the lair of the Church of Light. It was better to keep Shura temporarily and not show his face. Tomorrow, he would go to White Cliff. Chinray secretly clenched his fists. The snow dowlet flower must be obtained in this operation.